Well, the next day I go out to the Joint Security Station. We're out there, and I get a call from my company commander on our radio, like, "Hey, you need to come back to the FOB like ASAP. Battalion commander needs to talk to you." And so I arrive, and battalion commander talks to me, and he's like, "Hey, so the leadership in Bravo Company, everybody just got fired, and so you're going to go down there, and you're going to fix and rehab this platoon." That is when I think back on my career, like, okay, yeah, that's one that I got the most wrong. It was painful, and quite frankly, I don't know that I did it as well as I would have liked to. It was the greatest challenge.
Welcome to Combat Story. I'm AJ Pasciuti, a retired Marine, Force Recon, Scout Sniper, and Marine Gunner with 21 years of service, multiple combat tours, and a lifetime of lessons learned in the arena itself. On this show, I sit down with warriors from every front line to uncover what combat truly feels like and how it shapes the way we see life, each other, and ourselves. This is Combat Story.
Today on Combat Story, we sit down with Andrew Sullivan. Andrew served as an infantry officer in the United States Army for over 9 years, deploying to Iraq, Afghanistan, and Latvia. It was on that Afghan deployment that he became close friends with his linguist. And it was through that friendship that he first learned about the Special Immigrant Visa program, the promise this country made to the men and women who walked alongside us. He's been fighting for that promise ever since, first as Legislative Director at With Honor Action, today as Executive Director of No One Left Behind. The war ended for most of us. It didn't end for the people we left behind, and it didn't end for Andrew. This is Combat Story. Welcome back to Combat Story, everyone. My name is AJ Pasciuti. I'm happy to be sitting here with my new friend, former Army Infantry Officer Andrew Sullivan, and also Executive Director of the nonprofit No One Left Behind. Thank you so much for joining us today and having a conversation.
AJ, thank you so much for having me on. You've got so many cool guests that I feel that I am unqualified to be here, but really excited to share my story and talk about some of the work that I do at the nonprofit No One Left Behind.
Very excited to be here. The way that we got introduced was through a friend of mine, and a mutual friend is Mike Assad, who actually sat in the chair previous, and we had a great conversation, and he was like, "Hey, the next person you have to talk to, the person who helps breathe life into this organization is Andrew Sullivan." And then you and I were connected a number of months ago, and through a whole bunch of scheduling stuff, we're able to get a chance to sit down. I'm really excited.
You and me both. I'm glad we're finally doing it, although I do feel Assad he's like the Dos Equis commercial of the most interesting man in the world. If your listeners haven't seen that episode, they need to, because it's so good. But it's big shoes to fill because he has just a fascinating story.
Yeah,
just a really great human.
And sitting with him, I think that was the first time that he had ever really told his story on a relatively public forum.
Mm-hmm.
And early on in the interview, he was kind of very nervous, right? It was harder to kind of pull things out. And then by the end, it was just two guys just having a good conversation. And what struck me the most was how humble he was. I mean, how deferential I think he was to be able to give credits to a number of other people inside of that. And one of the things that we love on the show is being able to bring that out in people and say, like, your story is valuable, your story is purposeful, and has the ability to, bring people together just like he did with you and I. So, with that, I want to kind of, get started on this thing. I have, basically a bajillion questions that I'd love to be able to, ask you through this thing. But I think first, and what I generally start off with most of the guests that are on the show, is what called you to service?
It sounds trite. It sounds a little hackneyed, but it was 9/11. Before we started recording here, I was telling you in a previous life I wanted to be a chef. That's true.
For anyone at home, he was judging my knife collection that we have. So Sarah is a fantastic cook as well. So we were talking over some of the Japanese knives that we've had on some of our travels.
I was judging, and just to be clear, it's an A++ collection.
Yes.
Sarah nailed it. But, for me, it was one of those, I hadn't really felt called to serve. I didn't have a really large family history of service. I had a grandfather that served in the occupation of Japan, like right after the bombs were dropped. He was an MP. I had a great uncle that had served in Vietnam. But my dad didn't. He was kind of post-Vietnam generation, really didn't have any cousins, older cousins that had served by that point. But 9/11 it was very jarring to me, and I wanted to help my country. I wanted to serve. I felt, personally attacked, even though I was in Western PA and was nowhere to, in proximity to the attacks, but I wanted to serve. Kind of at the same time, I had been introduced to a friend of my dad's who we went to high school with that was Lieutenant Colonel Mark Becker, was a Green Beret, was a Army Ranger before that, just a fascinating dude that I really respected. And I'm like, okay, this is a guy that I want to emulate. And then kind of commensurate at the same exact time as all these things are happening, and this sounds ridiculous, but Black Hawk Down came out, as did Bandit Brothers, and I'm like, okay, well, that's the coolest thing ever. Like that is what I want to be. And so at that moment, I think I was a sophomore in high school, and I'm like, yep, I'm gonna do 11 X-ray, and I'm gonna enlist in Ranger Regiment. And that's what I want to do. So that was my call to service. Now it ended up I did not enlist because I am at least a coward when it comes to going against what my mother said, and so she basically said, no, you have to go to college, and we came to a middle ground where I'd enlist in the National Guard as a infantry guy, but then I'd go to college, and then I could go active duty.
Oh, so that's fantastic. I love the association with your mother, and especially as, I came from a family where my mother was, the person that I had, a lot of conversations with, a lot of obvious consternation with joining the military. I, too, didn't come from a very strong military background. And so for me, I think the unifying feature was two things. I think for 9/11 was very much like this national call to something, right? It was one of the, I always kind of go back with 9/11 was one of the worst days our country has ever faced. But September 12th, I think for us was one of these moments of where I wish that we could, personally, I wish we could get back to that sense of unity that we had as a country on September 12th, because everybody recognized that all we have is each other. And then for me as well, I think that the pop culture references, Hollywood does help. Hollywood does matter. It shows these really, true stories about what happens inside of service. For me, one of the most poignant, moments is in the soundtrack to Black Hawk Down, Dave Matthews Band.
I 100% concur.
Yep. So Dave Matthews Band does this song called "The Space Between." Yep. And there's this moment where it says, "The space between the bullets in the firefight is where I'll be hiding, waiting for you." And this reminded me of this moment of this kind of like, that for me has taken this picture that in the lulls between, where we're, I'm sure, going to get to in your story and where I've been in mine, is in these moments between the firefights is where I think about home. I think about my reasons for service, why I joined. It's a little more artsy, right? But it is something that I've always kind of, remained with me on that.
You don't understand how tickled I am, because I love that song and had the same reaction, and I hadn't heard it before until it was like the part of the closing credits to Black Hawk Down. So I totally agree. You also talked about the feeling of September 12th, and I think we'll get into my career kind of post-Army, but I worked on advocacy on bipartisan national security stuff for a couple years before I joined No One Left Behind, and it was for that exact reason, like the feeling of civic virtue and just commonality and partisan differences aside, and we came together as a nation, and I have been kind of trying to chase that feeling through my professional life, and it largely informs how I think about No One Left Behind and the work we do now. So
I really do appreciate that, the idea of being able to put aside partisanship. It's really easy, and a lot of guests understand on the show is we don't go into partisanship, quite often, but I think that what we do cover is policy. And I think that I like to look to people who I like to emulate, who I want to emulate, as the ability to put partisanship aside and work towards a common good. And I think that, when people look to veterans, they expect that of us, because our service, wherever that, from Peace Corps to Marine Corps, I think that service binds people towards a common set of values and a common set of purpose, who are able to put their partisan or ideological differences beside them. So kudos to you for being able to be at the helm of an organization that continues to do that, which I'm sure we'll get into. So take me through September 11th, itself, right? So take me through that day. We said you were a sophomore in high school?
Yeah, I was. So sophomore in high school, I'm trying to think. I think I was going to science class, was like my second period class, and we hadn't turned the TV on, but there was just there was rumors that a plane had hit the World Trade Center. And I remember, we were joking like, oh, what idiot flew a Cessna, into that? Like, how did you not see it? Because I don't think we understood. We certainly didn't understand the severity of it. We didn't understand it was an attack. And so, we had joked about that, and then like 30 minutes later, the North Tower, or excuse me, the South Tower had already come down, and we turned on the TV because at that point our teachers realized, like, okay, this is actually a really serious moment. This is a sea change in American history right now,
Right.
and we should be witnessing this. And so we turned it on. They're replaying photos of the tower coming down, and just the sense of dread and disgust that I felt. And I don't think at that very instant we didn't we didn't appreciate who did it, but I felt this sense of just immediate, like, whoever did this needs to pay.
Yeah.
And that's what I felt in the moment. And in the immediate aftermath, it was also like, what comes next? And this sounds, you want to talk about losing cool points? I'll give you one. Contextualize that I am 14 at this time and hysterical.
And we're not a real tough guy show. Yeah.
No. But I remember there was this thought, like, oh my God, we're in Erie, Pennsylvania, and that's not far from like Pittsburgh. And Pittsburgh, steel industry, which really wasn't that vibrant at the time. But like, would the terrorists attack Pittsburgh and therefore also hit Erie? I remember that was a point of discussion between me and my friends, which tells you how just savvy national security folks we were at the time.
You guys are thinking you're gonna be like the Wolverines, right? Like come.
Yes,
Wolverines!
I think that is a huge part of it. And so obviously, like, the silliness that a child has, but there was that part. But the part that was important and really did end up shaping my life was my sense of, like, okay, we need to right this wrong. We need to bring to justice the people that did this, and I want to make sure that this never happens again to Americans. And so, for all of the kind of silliness that it instilled in me, as to thinking what could come next, and would Mill Creek, Pennsylvania be attacked? No, but the desire to serve and the desire to join the military was absolutely, that fire was lit that day.
Yeah. Did you know that you were going to join the Army specifically? I mean, I have to ask. Inquiring minds want to know. Why not the Marines?
So Mark Becker, who I'd mentioned before, he actually worked in the Pentagon, and so I was very worried about, like, okay, is he okay? What happened, with the aircraft that crashed into the Pentagon? He ended up being okay. I did look at the Marine Corps. I knew I wanted to be a ground fighter. Like,
Yeah.
I wanted to be an infantry guy. I thought about the Marine Corps. But you guys, despite how good your uniform is, despite how good your public relations are as you fight, lava monsters, and
that's the one that got me.
Yeah, but Dave Matthews Band beat you out. It was at that time the zeitgeist had just moved past you, and Spielberg's Band of Brothers. I wanted to be the second coming of Dick Winters.
I appreciate that.
But no, I love the Marine Corps. So I went to Virginia Military Institute for undergrad.
Oh yeah,
where you can commission into any of the service branches. So our room, we had four. There were four of us. I had three roommates. Two of us went Army, two went Marine Corps. So love the Marines. Respect them.
Yeah.
Despite the knucklehead roommates that I had.
Do you still stay in contact with those roommates?
Oh yeah, love the guys. We're still close. We don't see each other as much as we want to, but that's because, like, schedules and kids and wives and all of that. But whenever we get the chance to come together and pretend we're 19 again, we do a really good job at it.
I remember my high school history teacher. So I was a senior in high school when 9/11 happened, but I was 16 at the time. So I was a younger senior. And I remember my high school history teacher, he was a reservist. He was a United States Marine, but he was a reservist. I felt for me that I was a kid. Right after, dread turned into like a little bloodlust, right?
Yep.
Like, who's going to pay? How do we do this? And he was actually kind of cautionary in that. He was like, you have to understand that this is the Taliban. These aren't the Afghan people, right?
Mm-hmm.
This was a specific organization, and we cannot, hate, an entire country or entire nation or a sect of people. This comes from a very niche, group with that. And I felt, again, with my 16-year-old brain, I felt like that was, a Marine not advocating for violence was an abdication of what a Marine is supposed to be. Now, a million years later, I can look back on that and kind of go, oh, wow, he seems to, that he understood the gravity, he understood a lot of the scope and scale of that. And through my own path was able to recognize the same thing. Did you suffer from that same idea of at 14 years old being like, why don't we just carpet bomb?
Yep.
What do we need to do?
What was that process like for you to be able to kind of go through that?
I think we had very similar thoughts. I think bloodlust is the perfect descriptor for it. And yeah, I mean, I was not a savvy national security or defense policy person at the time, and so I certainly saw a very binary world in which, okay, well, this group run by a Saudi that lives in Afghanistan, although it's obviously spread out all over, but like headquartered in Afghanistan and protected at least somewhat by the Taliban. Therefore the entire Afghan people are to blame.
Right.
And then also, I don't know, is there really any difference between Afghanistan and Iran or Iraq? And there was this this idea that there was this monolith of like, okay, that all of you are against us because some of you harbored Al Qaeda.
Yeah, it's like youthful naivete, right?
Very much so. And then I quite frankly don't think I became more nuanced as I went through, as I got older and went to college and stuff. But really, I think it was going to Iraq and Afghanistan and meeting people that were just many of them were repulsed by Al Qaeda or the Iranian-backed militias in Iraq. They were repulsed by AQI and what became ISIS. They were repulsed by the Taliban. It was meeting those people that one, they hated them, and then two, they were just normal people. They were just people that wanted to keep their kids safe, give them a better life, spend time with their spouse, and you realize like, okay, I had no idea what I was talking about.
I love that because the idea was I was raised with this idea of American exceptionalism, right? Or the idea of the American dream. I think deploying around the world for me got a chance to see that it's not the American dream. It is the American dream is a global dream. And the ability to have, your children to have a better future or an opportunity at a better future than you had, safe schools, education, right? Clean drinking water, the things that any parent would want for their child. That's not an American dream. We don't have the copyright on that or the trademark on that, right? That belongs to the world itself. And so that, you're right, the binary assessment of thinking like enemy or friend versus foe, going on overseas, going overseas itself, I was able to see that the world is often gray. It was really, really good to have a lot of senior leaders be able to help distinguish the idea, this constant, the Iraqi people are not your enemy, right? The Afghani people are not your enemy. There are groups inside of them that are our enemy, and we need to, as Secretary or former Defense Secretary Mattis said, no better friend and no worse enemy, right? Engage your mind before you engage your weapon.
Totally. And I will say, because you were earlier on and you were part of OIF 1, I didn't get there until late 2009. Okay. And so I think for a lot of us, you look at how COIN was refined, and by the time I got there, the guys that had done multiple Iraq deployments, the incredible staff sergeants and platoon sergeants, like they kind of understood that in a way that I had not. And so for me it was, I'm falling in on people that had already learned those lessons and understood that, like, okay, we need to separate the civilians from the insurgents. We need to separate the terrorists from the moms and dads. That part was kind of, quite frankly, easy for me because everybody else was already doing it. I think we had really learned that lesson by the time that I got to Iraq.
Fantastic. Yeah. That's really, really well said. And again, we're a learning organization. That's the big thing that I think that people may have misunderstandings of the military, is that the military is often only this way. I think that what makes the military very strong and adaptable is the fact that we're a learning organization. So let's step back for a second. Take me through, okay, so then you went to VMI. Tell me about, I've met a couple of officers in my path that have been to VMI. Tell me to what is VMI like?
I'm giving you a skeptical face because I'm worried about the officers you met.
Well, they were Marines.
Yeah. No, VMI is a very interesting place. So it is a state military college. So it is, it's not like West Point. It is not like the Naval Academy. Similar ones would be Citadel, which is a state college of South Carolina, or Norwich, but it is a state-run military school. Everyone has to be in their Corps of Cadets, so everyone wears a uniform, and then the uniform is similar to the West Point uniforms. It's circa 1860. And
wait, did you have like the big like looping kind of like what I've never?
Oh yeah.
Really?
So by my senior year, I was a cadet captain.
We're going to ask you for pictures of this, right?
Yeah, well, at least I had hair and was more fit. So I'll give you that. But I had this. I was the S4 captain, and so I've got just this massive sleeve of stripes and chevrons, and
Look like
Very,
an
very-
Iranian general or something.
Truly.
A South American dictator.
Truly. Now, no actual power or authority, but boy, did I look at. But for me, it was absolutely the place I needed to go. I graduated from high school at 17. I knew I wanted to go in the military. Like that was a foregone conclusion. But I also knew that at 17, if I went to Penn State or if I went to University of Pittsburgh, I was going to screw this up. I did not have the self-discipline. I was going to party and chase girls and be as dumb as I possibly could. And so in one of the few moments of introspection that any 17-year-old man has, I'm like, okay, let's go somewhere that's going to keep us on the straight and narrow. And so that's why I went there. And for me, I met some of the best people in the planet that I'm still friends with to this day. But it's a very strange culture. Like I said, you're doing parades every week. You're dressed in with the shako and the giant kind of the plumage on top of the shako.
What?
Oh yeah.
Oh man.
And you have to do ROTC, so you don't have to commission. It used to be mandatory commissioning. It no longer is, but you had to do ROTC. And I think my year it was close to like a 45% commissioning rate, which to me was always crazy. Like, I don't know why you'd want to go to VMI if you're not going into the military.
Yeah,
subject yourself to that for.
Really? I didn't know that.
I mean, it is a great net. Like, it's a very good school. It's a really good engineering school. Big in Virginia, and so the alumni network is great. And so there are a lot of people that wanted to go for that experience, and I think that's really cool. I don't know that I could have spent 4 years there and not commissioned, but
right. When you're looking at like Florida State or VMI, right? And if you're not deciding to commission at the end of that, you're like, well, one might be more fun than the other, right?
A little bit. And so because I was a real serious scholar, I was taking Arabic while I was there, and I had to take 3 years Arabic, and so because I wanted to try and get out of VMI, I'm like, okay, I'm going to go study abroad. And so I had my choice of Jordan, of Morocco, or of Egypt. So naturally, I chose the Gold Coast of Queensland and went to University of Queensland. When given the opportunity to go to VMI or Australia, Florida State, I went to Australia, Florida State for a semester.
Fantastic. Okay, so you graduated VMI, if I'm doing my math correct, 2004?
2004, I arrived at VMI. I enlisted in the National Guard, so went to basically had my freshman year at VMI, where it was a whole bunch of hazing and not having a particularly great time. Got done with that. Immediately went to Fort Benning for a summer of being a private first class and going through basic training. So it was really like 18 months of just kind of getting my kicked. But then I ended up graduating commissioning in May of 2008.
Okay, fantastic. So then commissioned.
So as a VMI graduate, do you have to go, and you've already joined the National Guard at this point, and so do you have to go to OCS? Does the Army have OCS?
So you guys get it right, because your officers, they all go to TBS.
Mm-hmm.
They don't know what branch they're going to go into. They don't know if they're going to be infantry or logistics or MI until they go to TBS, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I think that makes way more sense. For us, we actually get our branch prior to commissioning. So I knew I was going to be an infantry officer from middle of my senior year.
Great.
Now, the way that we did it is, and this actually has changed now, but we used to have this thing called Bullet 2, and it was a infantry basic officer leader course.
Okay.
And that was the first thing you did once you commissioned. And it was bizarre, because you took infantry guys, you took nurses, you took AGs, you took all of them together for 6 weeks of training, and it was not. I don't know that it was the most competent combat training I've ever received, but the idea was that way you give everyone a baseline into it, and so there is some commonality. But we're doing a convoy live fire that was like, okay, we're all going to pack onto this LMTV. We're going to put 20 of us, 10 to 10, and we're just going to put M4s off the side, kneel and face outward, and we're just gonna shoot blanks. And I'm like, okay, this is this isn't real. Like, I get that we're doing this for, for our AG folks, but like, this ain't it.
I'm imagining the Beverly Hillbillies right now as you guys are pulling up somewhere and things are falling off the sides and you guys are kind of getting out and trying to react to contact on that.
You've imagined it perfectly. Yes.
That's fine.
So you do that, and then after that 6 weeks, then you actually go to your individual school. So for me, it would have been IBOLC, so infantry basic officer leader course, and that was fantastic training. If you're an infantry guy, you basically have to go to Ranger school.
Yep.
It's it's not good to show up to your unit without a Ranger tab, or at least that's the way it was back when I was there. And so we would transition to IBOLC, and I had already done airborne school when I was a cadet at VMI.
Yeah.
But you'll do airborne school. They'll find stuff for you to do. I had time to kill, so I did combatives 1 and 2.
No way.
Which was great, except I kind of jacked my shoulder up like a week and a half before I was supposed to go to Ranger school, and I had to beg my commander because I suddenly went from being able to do 12 pull-ups to being able to do 0 pull-ups, and I'm like, look, I hurt myself. Give me a month. Like, let me hang out. And he's like, you get 1 month. We'll delay you a cycle. And if you don't get it, then like, sucks to suck, man. You're moving on. And thankfully, rehab my shoulder.
Good.
I think, I can't remember if the minimum was 6 or 7, but whatever the minimum was, I did the minimum, and that was all that my shoulder was going to let me have. And now I just live with a torn labrum and glenohumeral joint decades later.
Dude, I did the same thing when I went to go to commission from enlisted to officer. I had gotten in an accident and I had torn labrum, and so I show up to Quantico, Virginia, and I'm trying to talk to what we call our SPCs, our staff platoon commanders, and I'm an infantry guy, right? Who've done the force recon, they've done all that, and I go there and I go, hey guys, I'm dealing with an injury, and they're like, mount the pull-up bar. I'm like, I need you to know here, right? Like, I'm basically pulling with my left arm. I have my right arm on the bar as like, moral support, and then they're like, and then I get off the pull-up bar and I get like 6 pull-ups or something, whatever the minimum is. And they look at me and they go, force recon, huh? I'm like, come on, guys, right? Like, be human, right? Like,
this thing's barely attached. Leave me alone. Yeah,
exactly. You can see the bone, right? Kind of thing. How funny. Well, I'm glad that there was a little bit of like, common decency at one level to be like, hey, take a month, figure your thing out, right, before you go through that.
I will say, some of it is like make your own luck though, because I also like my PT test up until that point had been like, stud horse. Okay, now suddenly I can't do 0. So I at least had like some body of evidence to be able to say like, you've seen me here, like.
You set a precedent at some level. Like, I have a track record of not.
I didn't just fall off.
Dude. So I gotta know. So then, did you went through Ranger school, right?
Yes.
That just wasn't in my cards, but I always wanted to go to Ranger school. So tell me a little bit about it.
Well, so one, I always wanted to go to RSLIC and never got the chance to go to RSLIC. So you certainly have that on me. And also just to clarify, like this is a total aside, but I have to just get it out. It's the idea of like, what is a Ranger? And I want to clarify, I never got to serve in Ranger Regiment. So I do feel, to call myself a Ranger, it's like iffy. I went to Ranger school, but I would never imply that I'd gone to like 75th Ranger Regiment, because there's like a whole bunch of things around that, and my Ranger Regiment friends will gleefully say I'm not a Ranger, which they're true.
And so so we do have a lot of non-military listeners. Is that the difference between being tabbed and being scrolled?
Precisely.
Okay, and so can you go into the difference of that?
For sure. So Ranger Regiment, the 75th Ranger Regiment, 3 battalion, 1st, 2nd, 3rd, STB, different battalions in it. It is a special operations unit. It focuses on airfield seizure, but just really the Army's premier infantry unit. As an officer, you have to go to a Ranger Assessment Selection Program, and you have to be hired into it. You can't just basically say, oh, I'm gonna put in for Ranger Regiment. Well, you have to actually go to assessment and be accepted. So it is it's a standalone unit, and the scroll is what their unit patch is.
Okay, so every Ranger Regiment soldier is tabbed and also scrolled.
No.
Okay.
Every Ranger Regiment officer, I think every officer, certainly every infantry officer, is scrolled and tabbed.
Okay.
Every Ranger Regiment, like if you're a private, so you can actually enlist. When I talked about I wanted to go 11 X-ray and just immediately, I wanted to enlist under a Ranger contract where I would go to basic training, I'd go to airborne school, Then I would go to the enlisted Ranger Assessment Selection Program. If I get selected, then I would go to Ranger Regiment. And the way that works is you'll be an E2, a PV2, PSC, and you're going to just be in Ranger Regiment. And you're not going to go to Ranger School for a couple of years until you've proven yourself. So you'll actually have a lot of enlisted guys that do not have their tab because they're new to the regiment. Now, again, I think most of the NCOs, I would imagine basically all of them, certainly in the line battalions, have got their tab.
Cool.
So that is the difference there. One final thing, it was interesting to me. There's, I know we don't talk politics here, but I have to share this one. So Tom Cotton, senator from Arkansas, he was an infantry officer, Ranger qualified, and I remember he took a bunch of crap from Salon, the article, the magazine Salon, about like, oh, he calls himself a Ranger, but he's not a Ranger because he hadn't gone to Ranger Regiment. And I actually would agree if that was coming from somebody that was at Ranger Regiment. But when you hear it from like Salon, like, okay,
all right,
just shut up, man.
Yeah, exactly. You're really splitting hairs here, right? So like say that after you've gone through Ranger School, because like
precisely
as a Marine, we love to make fun of each other as our soldiers and Marines, right? Yep. But I can never come at somebody and talk crap about Ranger School, because I've never done Ranger School, right? So I would just sound like an idiot if I did that. Now we could always poke fun at each other, but there's never like, hey man, walk the walk, right, beforehand. And that's funny when it comes from a magazine who is painting somebody in a certain light that has not achieved those same things.
That's more artfully said than I would have. But that is certainly the thought that I had. So Ranger School was great. It definitely let me know what kind of my body was capable of, and it is very much a marathon, not a sprint. Okay. And by that I mean, the real crux of what Ranger School is, it's kind of just being tired, and either tired and hot or tired and cold and hungry. That's it. You have the first phase. You've got some individual events, so you've got to do a PT test and a 5-mile run and a 12-mile ruck under time, and some obstacle courses you have to pass. And so land nav gets a lot of people, and so you've got day and night land nav, but you've got basically these events that you have, the individual events that you have to pass to demonstrate a minimum physical fitness level, minimum competency in land nav, that kind of thing.
By the way, if I may interrupt, the way that the Army does land navigation, I think, is the correct way. So I've been to a number of different schools across different services. The way that the Marine Corps does land navigation is they've tried to find a small point, of which, total side note and nerding out here is that in the Marine Corps, we try to find little boxes, with an ammo crate with a, dog tag or whatever on it. When I went to RSLIC, the Army you were finding a larger area or a specific position that you were looking for, which is actually more attainable because of the maps and the protractors and compasses that we use. It's much more reasonable for what we're looking to find. You're trying to do terrain association. You're trying to find what I would consider orienteering versus land navigation. So I always looked up to the Army and actually stole the way that the Army did land navigation at RSLIC and brought that back to the Marine Corps. I felt that it was a more tactically savvy way of doing land navigation. So little tip of the cap to the Army.
We've got him, folks. The Marines just admitted that the Army does it better.
We're gonna have to edit that one out.
This episode. No, thank you. But so you have this kind of, you pass that those kind of opening qualifying events, and then they teach you how they want you to patrol, and so that they're teaching you squad and then platoon level tactics, and they do it brilliantly, and it really is. I mean, it's incredible stuff that it paid dividends in deployments, because although you weren't really doing so much of Iraq and Afghanistan was vehicle based, and you're in MRAPs or you're in strikers or whatever, there wasn't kind of a mounted element to it. But the principles of patrolling that they teach you, and the principles of reacting to contact and setting up a patrol base, and really just fantastic, absolutely great instructors. And then you would go out on field training exercises, and you would just kind of walk. You'd walk around with a heavy ruck. You wouldn't sleep. You would just get the RD simulators thrown at you, so you have to run. And it wasn't sexy, but it really was just, how are you going to be able to act when you're 72 hours into this field problem, and you've gotten a total of 3.5 hours sleep, and
broken sleep, right?
oh yeah, very much fragmented sleep. And you're I was a summer ranger, which is admittedly easier than being a winter ranger. Although I will say there was one day where I was carrying you change positions, right? So sometimes you're a squad leader, sometimes you're a team leader, sometimes you're just a rifleman, sometimes you're carrying a machine gun, and it's one of those. It's Fort Benning, Georgia at the time. So I'm in the first phase, which is at Fort Benning. It's hot. It's 95 degrees, and I'm sucking. And I'm starting to get the wobbly legs, like baby giraffe here. Like my vision's not exactly going great, and I'm like, I'm gonna heat cat. And the problem is, if you heat cat, you're now dropped from the course, and no fault of your own, but for safety reasons, you're dropped from this cycle, and there is no waiting around, and you'll never come back as at least summertime ranger.
And you're an officer.
And I'm an officer. So it's like, okay, great. Now I get to go tell my battalion commander why I don't have my...
Right.
And I'm like, oh, this is not good. And so my awesome, ranger buddies were like, hey man, I've got like an extra oral rehydration supplement, like take mine. And that was helping, but it still wasn't going to do it for me. What ended up happening is like two other people in, adjacent patrols heat catted. And so they put everybody on like a safety stand down for a little bit. And so they took like 30 minutes, like, all right, take your tops off, like sit down, like you Rangers are getting soft, so we gotta stop. And I'm like, yeah, soft Rangers. I'm just like, force hydrating myself. And so
you dodged the proverbial silver bullet there.
Oh, yes. Brilliantly
My military
stated.
Listeners will know exactly what I'm talking about.
I don't know that we need to, that there needs to be exposition on that one. You either know or you don't.
One of the other cool things that later on in my career, again, that another tip of the cap to the Army is, if I'm not mistaken, when you go through Ranger School, they call you Rangers. Mm-hmm. So very different than the Marine Corps. So I've done all the tough guy schools in the Marine Corps, right? We do not call you, when you're going through recon school, we don't call you recon, right? And so whenever we were addressed whenever I was in an Army school, they would always call you the thing. They would call you airborne. Hey, come here, airborne, right? Or come here, Ranger. And, I think that people can, duke it out in the comments whether I think this is a good thing or not. My own personal opinion was what it did was it gave aspirational soldiers the idea of what they could become. And it gave them this thing where we were very much, you cannot be called a reconnaissance Marine until you cross the threshold and you turn in your rope, right? And now you're a reconnaissance Marine. So there's two different schools of thought. The Marine Corps was very much, you have to earn this position to be ever even considered or called that. The Army was very much what I felt was, you are going to try to breed this into you, this idea of who you are, and we're going to take you along the way.
Yeah.
I don't know if that maybe people didn't put that much thought into it, and that was just a culture that was already there. But that was something that I noticed that was markedly different than the Marine Corps culture.
That's interesting, and I don't even, like you said, people can duke it out because I actually don't know which one makes more sense to me.
Right.
Like, and I see utility in both. Sometimes.
Yes, exactly. So yeah, you're not called a reconnaissance Marine until you actually graduate and then become a reconnaissance Marine, where in the Rangers, right, you were called Ranger and then you graduate to become a Ranger at that.
Yeah.
So awesome. Sorry, completely, diverted that.
No, you've already seen a whole bunch of asides from me, and you've got a lot more coming.
I love it.
Yeah. But no, so it really is, how do you kind of push through just being tired? How do you push through, not wanting to get up? How do you push through not wanting to, walk 4 miles at, 2 a.m. to set up a patrol base, to know that you're going to get blown out of the patrol base with RD simulators like 30 minutes after you sit down. And, that really is the crux of the event. And at that point, though, it very much is no longer a team. It's no longer an individual event. It is incredibly a team event. And so you better hope that you have got great dudes to your left and right. I was very lucky in that I did. My Ranger buddy was he was a enlisted guy that actually was a Ranger Regiment guy. And he and I recycled. So we recycled the first phase together. We did not pass patrols.
Oh, wow.
So
you got to get 2 goes, right?
Correct. So did not get my go. No, you only need to get 1 go, but you need to make sure you have more than 50% goes, or at least that's how it was when I was there. So he and I recycled together, then got put in a new company together. And when we had like 3 weeks to kill or so, maybe it was more like a month or so, because we're in between cycles. So had a month off, which was kind of good. Could study patrols. We got Saturday passes. You weren't supposed to drink alcohol, so naturally he and I would go back to my apartment, order a pizza, drink a 6-pack of beer, and and then
shove down all the food you could.
Absolutely crush all the food we could. And then he and I went through the rest of it together. But you better have a good team. And I'll give you, this one example of why if you don't, it doesn't work out well. We are in mountains phase, and mountain phase is the second phase. I think it's the hardest phase, absolutely miserable time. And the way that they split up, the way they do.
Where is mountain phase?
Dahlonega, Georgia.
Okay.
So North Georgia. The way they split up the patrols is, you'll be either a planning or an execution. And so they'll switch leadership mid-patrol. And if you're planning, you've got to do the operations order. You start initial movement. You'll do some sort of react to contact. And then they'll stop and they'll change out leadership. And so if you're not in leadership, you better actually pay attention to the op order, because you may be executing somebody else's plan. And if you've not paid attention, you're going to have a bad time. But we're on this, and I was a platoon sergeant for the planning phase, and we kill this op order. We do great. It's like, oh, we got our go, baby. We're good. And we had done a react to contact, killed the react to contact, did awesome on it. And so now we're gonna start the patrol again. And I know that as soon as we move a kilometer down towards the objective, they're gonna index us. I've got my go. All we got to do is I've counted everybody, and we're going to start traveling again. And so it's me and my medic. We're looking at each other just like you and I are now, and we're both counting 1, 2. So we're going to make sure that we have everybody in the patrol as we start moving again. We'd move to the front of the formation or count everybody. And I'm supposed to have 42, and we get to 39. I count the medic 40, count myself 41, and we're short one. I'm like, uh-oh.
Oh no.
And the RI, the ranger instructor, standing over my shoulder, can tell that I did not, because he was watching me as I was lipping the words, and he's like, "You got everybody?" And I'm like, "Yes, RI, yes, Ranger, this RI." And he's like, bullshit, So he says, screams, "BS! No, I know you don't." And I'm like, "Nah, we good."
That's what you said.
No, I'm sure I said it more respectfully than that, but I'm like, "Medic, you got 42, right?" He's like, "Yeah." I'm like, "Cool." He's like, "We're up." He's like, "No, you're not. You know how I know? Because your platoon leader walked behind you and didn't come through." So we were counting everybody out, and they were supposed to file through us. And
we call it a Mako gate, right? So a Marine ammunition casualty, something, right? I don't know what it stands for, but it's it's a physical gate you have to walk through, right?
We do something similar, and I can't remember what it's called anymore. But my platoon leader, and again, good dude, had done a good op order. We did a good op order together. But he's fighting his fight too. He's got a million things on his brain, and just decides to not walk through us. And so both we fail that patrol. I get a major minor. So I get a demerit for nasty work of not counting out and giving the thumbs up. So it was bad. Now, thankfully, now I've got another patrol. I ended up having to get my go on the very last day. But I ended up being platoon leader for it, and was execution platoon leader. And in that brief moment, that tired Ranger platoon was operating like a CAG squadron, just smashing smashing the op for. So
good.
I managed to get it, but it's one of those small stupid things like that. A dude falling asleep on patrol, and you don't notice him, and then he's missing, and it's like, okay, well, everybody in that leadership team just did not get a go. Doesn't matter how great they were, dude fell asleep and somebody didn't notice.
Really?
And, now everybody gets a no-go.
So I didn't know that was, obviously, I know that they're going to be judging you as a leader, as a patrol leader, all that kind of stuff as you're navigating through that. But I didn't know that the amount that you could be hurt by other people inside of that, not crossing through a Mako gate, that would be something where it's like, hey, idiot, why didn't you do this? Okay, we know that you were doing the right thing, as the leader coming through here, but they wow, I didn't know that. I didn't know that. So you can be totally, blue falconed, right? By somebody else. Do you guys use that term in the Army?
Very much so, yeah.
Cool. Yep. So for the non-military listeners, you can Google Blue Falcon and see what that term means for sure.
Silver Bullet, Blue Falcon.
All kinds of good ones on this one.
But yeah, so but thankfully again had great dudes that I was with, and managed to, after recycling Mountain Phase, recycling Darby, so at Fort Benning, the very first phase, Then went straight through. And I will say one of the fun ones, if you're airborne qualified, you have to jump. There are a couple of different chances to jump. And I ended up jumping 3 times there. Well, the last one, actually at Mountain Phase, I rolled my ankle, rolled it really bad, screwed it up bad enough that when we got to Florida, we actually had bus down to Florida. Sometimes you'll actually jump into Florida just straight from Dahlonega, and you'll jump in. Thankfully, we didn't. I don't know if it was weather, maintenance, non-available aircraft, whatever. So we bus down there, which was great because you just get to sleep on a bus. And
you're finally catching up on all the sleep that you haven't gotten.
Exactly. But we get down there and we're going to jump into the FTX.
Okay.
Well, my ankle is not feeling good. And so they, they let us go. We're at an Air Force base. And so, they let me go in, and I'm wearing the BCG glasses. I've showered like twice in like 50 days. I'm just disgusting. And I'm hopping around, and I'm like on this air base, Egwin Field.
Okay.
And, or Egwin Air Force Base. And, I'm seeing all of these like pretty Air Force people.
And I'm looking like a gremlin.
No, truly, just this disgust. And thankfully, I did not have a broken leg, but I had, or a broken ankle, but I had a really messed up ankle. Like, they don't care. You're still jumping out of this aircraft.
Ranger. You're jumping,
cool. Right? Yeah. And so, I remember we jumped, and it was, thank God, it was the softest landing I've ever had.
Oh, no.
I was, even when I was in good shape, I was, 6'3", 200. Just gonna land like on my side and hope for the best. Yeah. And so we're not even having our feet touch down. We're just going straight shoulder on this. And then it was like the softest, God was looking out for me.
Like a pillow.
No, truly. It was like, okay, it took me like 2 minutes to actually land because it was just floating there for forever.
You guys were probably flying the T-10 parachutes?
Yep. Can't steer them. You're just going where they tell you to go.
Yeah, right. You just pull these little red toggles of aspiration or whatever it is right? You're like, oh, I guess I'll turn this.
Yeah.
When I went to Arslik, I was already a person who could fly a square canopy.
Yeah.
But at Arslik, we jumped, the round T-10 parachute, and you're like, God, I'm just gonna rocket into the ground, and like these little stupid toggles come out, and all it does is turn you a little bit.
Just pull against where you're slipping. Like, okay.
You're doing this thing as you're flying it. It was always the scariest thing was jumping around canopy.
Oh, it's just, Jesus, take the wheel.
That's exactly it.
Yeah.
Please don't break anything. Please don't break anything. Please don't break anything. As you're trying to land. Dude, I love that.
Yeah.
I love that.
Well, and I also hated it because I was so terrified of like static line injuries.
Mm-hmm.
Like because they just put the, the fear of God into you
Yeah.
of like, listen, if you get wrapped up in your buddy's static line or your own static line, like, you'll rip an arm apart. You'll like,
deglove, whatever.
Yeah.
Or you'll lose. So did you come out of a helicopter, or did you guys come out of like a C-130 type aircraft?
I think that one was a C-17.
So big.
Yeah. But I've only ever jumped C-130, C-17. I've heard jumping from helicopters is fun.
It's like a slide.
Yeah.
So like coming out of a C-17, I've jumped out of a C-17 and a C-1. C-130s are better for Marines because we'll just come off the back.
Yeah.
But C-17s, you come out the door and you're like, duh, 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 duh. You hear the person like, if they don't exit right, you hear them slap down the fuselage of the aircraft. Right? You're like, oh God,
that's coming for me. Yeah.
Ready to go. Kind of thing.
Well, I was lucky when I went to airborne school as a cadet. I hated it, but for at the time, but then I realized like, okay, this is great. Where I happened to be my roster number, I was like the first man in the stick on 3 of the 5. And at the time, the Sergeant Airborne screwing with me, he's holding me, but he's like, lean out the aircraft. Yeah. He's holding me. Yeah. So I'm like having to look down. And if somebody's scared of heights, I'm like, all right, well, this is terrible.
Thank you. I'm petrified of heights.
Hate it.
Just because I jump out of airplanes doesn't mean that I enjoy heights. Like I jump out of airplanes because there's another guy behind me that's about to push me out, right? And I
get UCMJ if I don't do this.
Exactly. Thank you. I appreciate that. I really do appreciate that.
Yeah, you and I were same boat. So, at the time, I'm like, oh my God, that's terrible. And now I realize, like, oh, there's basically no way I can have a static line injury at this point. Like, good. Ends up being great. But yeah, so, thankfully, these small, silly things, though, like, had weather been worse and, I had a bad landing on it, like, you don't make it.
Your Ranger career is over, right?
Exactly.
And then as an infantry officer, not being tabbed is
Big demerit. Yeah.
Big demerit. Like you can't promote to captain.
You can, but it's one of those. And it's also, I will say, it's also unit dependent.
Okay.
So if you go to the 82nd or 173rd Airborne or 101st, and you're showing up as a infantry officer without a tab, like you will be waiting to get a platoon. Like, and they'll do it. They'll give you a platoon because they're required to give you a platoon, but like it may not be a platoon that you want, and it may be oh, actually you're an infantry guy, and here you're going to take a distribution platoon.
Interesting. So it's like your infantry sorta, right?
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay.
But for me, like I ended up actually, this is a fun one too. This is the first time the Army bamboozled me. My first duty station was 1st Armored Division at Fort Bliss, Texas.
Okay.
There were actually plenty of infantry guys that didn't have it. I was like one of the not few, but like there weren't a ton, and like so it was very much a positive for me. So they didn't care. But if you're going to a light infantry unit and you don't have one, it can be an issue. But also, another aside, I'm so sorry, AJ. I told you
this is what this is about. This is great.
So your first duty station, you can in the Army you can actually add for a duty station.
Let's add
additional duty service obligation.
Okay.
So a lot of times, like if the military pays for your grad school,
mm-hmm.
you can have an add requirement, because if they're paying for you to go to grad school, like they want their return on it, and so you could have an additional duty service obligation because they give you a specific school or something. Well, when you're commissioning, you actually can say, I'll take an additional 2 years. So instead of owing 4 or 5 years, I'll owe 6 or 7 years if you just send me to Fort Bragg.
Oh, okay.
Or you send me to Germany or something like that. Now, I thought, like, okay, that's crazy. I would never, agree to more time for that. But the other thing that they do is, you're a widget at that point. You've never commanded anything. You've never led anything. You're a widget. And so, at least back in the day, you could trade duty stations with other lieutenants that were going through and roughly the same cycle. So like,
okay,
if somebody was, the same cycle or the next cycle ahead of you, like, cool, that's fine. You can trade. Well, I had been dating my high school into college sweetheart, and, I'd picked Fort Stewart, Georgia,
okay,
because we're like, oh, it'll be close to Savannah, you can get a job. So naturally, of course, we break up, and it's like, okay, what am I doing here? Well, I met a dude that he was going to go to Germany, but he was getting married to a girl from Georgia, and he's like, I really want Stuart, and I've got Germany, and I'm like, baby, say less, man.
Say no more, fam.
Yeah, newly single, and I'm going to go to Germany at 22. Like, watch out here. So
count me in.
We switch. It goes through. I've got an RFO for Germany, and it's like, oh, get ready, Big Daddy's coming to Germany. So the Army being the Army. We go to Ranger School. I can't check email. I don't know what's going on with my orders or anything like that. Get my go in Florida. You come back to Fort Benning. Graduated Fort Benning, and like 1 or 2 days prior to graduation, you're doing admin stuff, and they bring in all of the brand new infantry officers that had just gone straight from IBulloch to Ranger School.
Okay.
And they're giving you your orders because they need to get you off installation. You need to go to your unit. You need to go to work, and they're calling names out, and it's like Smith, Bragg, Stewart, Fort Drum, Sullivan, Fort Bliss, Texas, and I'm like, whoa,
that doesn't sound like Stuttgart.
No, you're not tracking. I'm going to Germany, and they're like, no, you're not tracking. You got a new RFO, and so the Army needs of the Army. The unit I was going to go to was like coming back to the U.S. Like years down the road. It was all part of BRAC, base relocation and closure. Back in the 90s, early 2000s, we determined what bases were going to close and stuff like that. But anyways, this unit was going to move from Germany to the U.S., but it was going to move in like 2 years. But they're like, no, we're not going to send you there. So we just decided, like, here's Fort Bliss, man.
So because you were originally identified to go to Germany, you were sent to hypothetically, you were sent to a unit that was going to begin the rotation back from Germany.
Yeah.
So instead of sending you to Germany to rotate back with them in a couple of years, they're like, we'll just hold you here and then wait for this unit, to effectively come back.
Well, kind of, because actually, once I got to Bliss, they're like, actually, this unit's already in Iraq. They would love for you to come join them. Like, and I was there for like a week and then went to Iraq. So basically, I went from Fort Stewart to, thinking I was going to go to Germany and just be, live this cosmopolitan life, chase European girls too. Nope, I'm going to Fort Bliss and then immediately going to Iraq.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Well, you got the rug pulled out from under you on that one. Needs of the Army.
The big green weenie.
Yes, we share the same sentiment in our service.
This episode is brought to you by Cash App. Bitcoin comes up more and more in conversations about long-term financial planning, how to build exposure over time instead of trying to time the market. And if you're doing that, the platform you use for it actually matters. If Bitcoin is part of your long-term strategy, consistency matters. Cash App lets you set up automatic Bitcoin purchases with Auto Invest, so you can build exposure over time instead of trying to time every move. You can also use roundups or paid in Bitcoin to make Bitcoin part of your normal money flow. Automatic Bitcoin purchases on Cash App have zero fees and zero spread, which matters if you're buying regularly. For a limited time, new customers can get $10 added to their balance. Use code BITCOIN10 when you sign up. And don't forget, send at least $5 to a friend within the first 2 weeks. Terms apply. Download Cash App today. Visit our link in the bio. Bitcoin services by Block Inc. See Bitcoin disclosures at Cash App/legal/podcast. And now, back to our show.
So tell me about Fort Bliss. Is everything the name says?
So it actually is a nice post. It turns out, one, the training environment is incredible because it's a huge post, massive training area, tons of maneuver range. So if you're doing tanks or Bradley gunnery, a lot of room to do that.
So this is an armor base?
Oh yeah, it's very much an armor base. Home in the 1st Armored Division. So great training area. I didn't realize it until I went to Afghanistan, but it is dead on. It looks like the arid parts of Afghanistan.
Yeah,
really, really good. It's a fun city too. Like El Paso is a fun city. I think the issues with Fort Bliss are a lot to do with 1st Armored Division, because the post itself is also brand new, really pretty nice. El Paso is interesting though because when I was there, you could not go into Mexico. Like you got to GOMAR. General Officer Memorandum of Reprimand, so a nasty gram at the very least. If you went into Juarez, just given some of the violence that was there, and so you're in this isolate because El Paso is like 5 hours from Albuquerque is the next kind of like big city. Wow. So you're there, you're in the middle of nowhere, and so if you're having a bad time, you're going to have a really bad time.
Okay.
But if you're having a good time, there's a lot of fun things to do.
Okay, great.
But yeah, I arrived in the unit that I was with. 4th Battalion, 6th Infantry Regiment, 4th Brigade, 1st AD, which no longer exists. It has been bracked, so that brigade has gone away. They were already in Iraq.
Moment of silence.
Bro, AJ, I cannot. I am the death sentence for units. Both that brigade and then also the brigade where I was a company commander in Afghanistan. When I got back from those, both brigades do not exist anymore. Now, thankfully, the battalions are still operating, still doing great things. But yeah, those brigades went away.
I wouldn't use that on my resume.
Yeah, no, for sure.
Okay, so then you're there for a very short period of time, right? So
arrived, didn't get a place. They literally just put me up in the bachelor officers' quarters because I knew, I was going to go downrange basically immediately. And so moved there, put my stuff in storage, and thankfully, having gone to VMI, and then I lived in a fully furnished apartment with 4 other dudes at Fort Benning. I had no stuff. It was a car and
2
whatever.
2 sea bags in a car. Right?
Exactly. So I just kind of crammed that stuff in my car and put the car inside of a garage and yep, that'll do. And so it was only there for a really short time, and then late deployer to Afghanistan or to Iraq, Mesan Province, Iraq, which is southeast on the border with Iran, north of Basra.
Oh, okay.
So north of Basra, and then on the border with Iran.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay. And how long was that deployment?
So it was a year-long deployment. But I did not get that. I only had 7 months that I was there because it was a late deployer and everything.
Okay.
And so for me, arrived and it was great. I actually stepped directly into a platoon.
How was that? So you're 2nd lieutenant at this point or 1st lieutenant?
2nd lieutenant still.
So 2nd lieutenant.
2nd lieutenant still.
Showing up in Iraq, in Basra, Iraq in 2008? 2009?
No, 2009, and it would have been Amara, Iraq that I showed up. So FOB Actually, this would have been Fob Gary Owen is the Fob, and showed up, and it was good. It was really good. I went to Delta Company first. I had a great platoon sergeant. I was only there for about a month, and I can remember this one because I was so scared. We had our main fob, and then we had these little joint security stations that we ran with the Iraqis. And the previous night, I had gone out on patrol, and it was like a counter IDF patrol or counter IED patrol, but just driving around in the dark, looking for people doing the wrong thing. Nothing happens. Like truly uneventful patrol where we just drive the routes we're supposed to drive, don't see anything, set up some Overwatch, don't see anything, come back home. Well, the next day I go out to the joint security station. We're out there, and I get a call from my company commander on our radio, like, hey, you need to come back to the FOB, like, ASAP. Like, battalion commander needs to talk to you. And I'm like, oh my God.
I've been here a month. I couldn't have screwed this much up.
Well, and then he's like sending me an FBCB2 message, like, hey, what'd you do last night? Did something bad happen? I'm like, legitimately nothing happened. And I'm like, what happened? Like, what did I do? Why am I in trouble? And so I'm freaking out, and I'm like, all right, well, career's already over.
It was a short run, but it
was glorious, well lasted. And so I arrive, and battalion commander talks to me, and he's like, hey, so the leadership in Bravo Company, like really the platoon leadership, 3rd Platoon Bravo Company, everybody just got fired. And so you're going to go down there, and you're going to, fix and rehab this platoon. You're doing great here, but we need you to go down there. And so what had happened was there was they had, I think a wrong kind of culture in there, and there was a little bit of hazing and stuff like that. And one of the soldiers, his nickname was Jew, and which is bad in and of itself. And then what was really bad was they decided to tape a Star of David to the gunner's cupola of his track, and were driving it around in sector, and the Iraqis were offended by that by that sensibility there. And so anyway, so some issues in that platoon. I ended up going and taking over that platoon, and then the rest of the deployment we were there, and again, a lot of counter IDF, counter IED. It really was not a particularly kinetic deployment, especially at the first place I'd gone to. We had some indirect fire. There were occasional IED strikes and stuff like that. But by the time I arrived, it really had been a relatively calm and uneventful deployment. But it was a lot for me. It was kind of a big challenge in how do we fix the culture of that platoon,
Right.
Where the platoon sergeant went away, the platoon leader went away, the weapons squad leader took over as my platoon sergeant. But there were just some discipline problems in that platoon, and it was like, how do we kind of refocus what this is? And in a lot of ways, they had metastasized amongst the E5 level, which is, I think, the hardest to kind of root out right there.
So take me through some of that stuff, because I think that where I find a lot of interest is, you and I were discussing a little bit before off camera. I think that one of the hardest jobs in my, professional opinion is that of a second lieutenant stepping into a realm of where you have a ton of experience, that, you have educational experience or institutional knowledge, but you don't have experiential knowledge. And now you're put into a position of where you own all of the risk, you own all of the decisions, the mountain of responsibility that is laid on a second lieutenant, 22, 23 years old, right, on your shoulders. And one of the things that I don't think that we talk about enough as a military culture or military society is, how do you affect culture inside of a unit, especially with the weight that's on your shoulders? How do you do that?
It was that was truly, when I think back on my time in the military, that may have been the hardest time that I had in the military. It was the greatest challenge. And it was painful. And quite frankly, I don't know that I did it as well as I would have liked to, because at the end of this, I'll talk about what happened once we got back to Fort Bliss, because unfortunately, a lot of these guys ended up facing UCMJ because, I wasn't able to, fix the problem while we were in Iraq.
So you mentioned it was like a culture kind of metastasized. So
yeah,
what was the culture? Was it a culture of disrespect? Was it a culture of, cowboys? Or...
I think it was really both of those things. I mean, I think it was a culture of disrespect. It was also, you had a lot of guys, especially at the junior NCO level, that this was now their second deployment. A lot of them had done the 15-monther, year-long plus surge deployments. had seen a lot of combat, knew a lot of things, but were kind of callous in the way that they treated, fellow NCOs, certainly in the way that they treated their, the soldiers that were underneath them. And so there was this sense that they knew better, and they weren't going to hear it from, some of the older NCOs. And they were also just going to, I think they saw it as them stewarding junior enlisted soldiers, like, we are going to toughen you up for combat. But it really wasn't. It wasn't like sharpening, them for combat. It was more just kind of hazing for hazing's sake, I would say.
How would you have done it differently now?
Well,
stepping into that role.
Yeah. So I think the problem was, I did not come down as hard on the junior NCOs as I should have, and I think it was for a lot of what you just described, which is, look, I just got there. I've have all of 2 months in combat. I don't have my CIB. These dudes have, all of this time and have already, served an 18-monther in Mosul in a really kind of violent and, kinetic time. And so,
was it like a sense of imposter syndrome at some level?
I think that is a fair way of describing it. And it was one of those like, okay, these NCOs, they get it, and I just got to win them over. And we had a great first sergeant and a great commander, and it's like, okay, we just got to kind of like reorient them. And I don't want to come in and just absolutely crush them and, read them the riot act and cut their legs out from under them in front of their troops. Mm-hmm. And in retrospect, like, I think I misread the situation. And the reason I say that is when we came back, we unfortunately had, issues with drugs. And so a couple of the junior enlisted guys got in trouble for, peed hot on urinalysis. And it turns out that one of the NCOs, and this came out like subsequent to it, he was the one that was kind of facilitating them doing it. And, he was one that, he was probably our biggest problem NCO. And when it's like just the below the line kind of subordination and disrespect, where it's like, okay, are you really going to try and do an Article 15? Because now you just look like you're being a soft skinned, weak officer.
There's this really tough line of where you're at, because you're wanting to hold a line, discipline, accountability, right, sensibility, and this thing, but you're also, you don't have a combat infantry badge. You haven't gone through the same thing. So there's like this, we have this weird, and this is my own personal opinion, but like this reverence for people who have seen combat that we almost feel like they're untouchable. And one of the pieces of advice that I give to young, I speak to a lot of Marine lieutenants, is like, I don't particularly give a crap if somebody has that badge or not. I think that leadership is leadership, and discipline and accountability, those things remain the same, whether or not you have the piece of chest candy that says you did the thing or not.
Yeah.
And so trying to give younger lieutenants or younger officers or leaders at any point and saying, what right is, and right doesn't shift because somebody has seen combat or not, is something like, so and giving them the ability to stand up for that and saying, hey, at the end of the day, doing this thing the wrong way and allowing a culture to metastasize is inherently flawed, I would say.
Oh, I totally agree. And, for me, it was one of those, at the time, I wouldn't have used the word like metastasized in the culture. I thought it was like, okay, they need a general course correct. And I just didn't, I didn't recognize that I didn't get it.
Well, it's pretty mature of you to recognize that now, right? And not be like, not kind of wash it away as, naivete, right? Or whatever it is. And say like, no, I think that's actually really strong as a leader to be able to say, yeah, we kind of messed that one up, or I kind of messed that one up. And I think that, again, as a learning organization, as a learning institution, and as a person who, is a, student, is a perpetual student, I think that being able to look back and go, like those teeth sucking moments and be like, I probably could have done that one better.
Yeah.
I think that's I think it's a very powerful lesson.
And it was tough for me because one of the junior enlisted that got in trouble had been my driver. And, you forge a bond with, with all of your soldiers, but like, we spent a lot of time riding around in 1151s together. And, I knew he was a good person. And I think that like, had we removed some of the negative influences on him, what could have been, and I regret that I didn't come down harder on, a problem NCO that I should have recognized was a problem NCO, rather than, okay, we just need kind of a gentle course correction.
Interesting. Yeah. Interesting. That's pretty poignant. It's pretty powerful to be able to recognize that. I appreciate you talking about that.
I'll be honest, of all the things we've talked about today, that's been the hardest one to share, because like, that is when I think back on my career, like, okay, yeah, that's one that I got the most wrong.
So I'm very open and transparent with my own mistakes, right? And I appreciate you doing the same here, because some second lieutenant out there may watch this episode and go, I'm in that exact same position right now. And this gives them the power to say, like, hey, I've got this person who's walked in the same exact position and, pulled some punches when they needed to be able to throttle up a little bit more, and now sits 20 years later kind of thinking about it.
Well, I am hopeful that 2009 knucklehead Andy Sullivan can hopefully be of assistance here 20 years down the road.
Yeah, it's part about being in service, right?
Absolutely.
We never know where we're going to be in service to. Okay, so you come home from that deployment, still some discipline issues. You're having to take care of that.
Yeah. So, but it went. Quite frankly, like we made those changes that we had to, and then things got really much better. And so the platoon kind of came out of that better for it. I ended up being. I was pretty heartbroken. I thought I was going to go be the scout platoon leader and go to RSLIC. I had been told as much by my company commander and by my battalion commander. And then unfortunately, I can't remember, I think RXO ended up having to go to the 3 shop, or we lost somebody in the 3 shop, so they pulled my XO. And so they're like, hey, I know what we told you, but actually...
You see, what happened was...
Yeah. So instead of being a special platoon leader, you're now the XO, and was the XO for about 5 months. That went really pretty well. And then kind of at this time, I'm like, okay, well, I'm going to drop my Ranger Regiment packet. Like, I'm going to RASP, but I need my battalion commander to sign my 4187, the Department of the Army Form 4187 that allows me to do this. And he says, no, actually, you're going to be the battalion S4. Like they were impressed enough with my
really?
Yeah. So they were impressed enough with what I'd done as an XO that they're like, we're going to make you the battalion S4. And I got a really good OER out of it. Was the number 1 lieutenant that he rated. So it's not as though they didn't like me, but they are like, we're going to go back to Iraq. The entire mission is going to be closing down bases and moving property. We want you to be the battalion S4. So they wouldn't sign my 4187. And actually, I'll share. This is a failing, but it's funny, and I'll share it. So we had, I found this out. We went on a gunner. We're doing gunnery now, so we're in the field for like 5 weeks. I ended up being like the range safety officer half of the frickin' time, and so was like running this gunnery and helping make it happen, and accorded myself well. And I went back and I'm like, hey, can I I'm a peacock. You gotta let me fly. Yeah. Man, yeah. And was told no. And we come in out of the field, and somehow I'm now on the staff duty roster. So I've now been like, you don't get to apply for try out for Ranger Regiment. You're gonna go be the battalion logistics officer.
Right.
And oh yeah, thanks for like running gunnery. But also you now get to eat staff duty. And I remember I typed out this tome, and it's one of those just like writing furiously. I'm just angry. I'm sleep deprived. But I write this like tome of an email that I send to my battalion commander of like, sir, this is, it's unfair. How dare you? And also like, you don't understand my seminal genius on, I'll be so good for, Ranger Regiment. And I send it and CC my battalion or my company commander, but I don't like send this to my company commander. I don't send it to like another lieutenant.
It doesn't get filtered.
No, it is the rantings of a madman at like 3 a.m. After
I'll
5
show
weeks.
him.
Yeah,
Right.
like this guy's gonna give. Yeah. And so of course, like my company commander calls me in the next morning. He's like, I get you're mad, but this was really stupid.
Yeah.
Like,
how'd that work out?
Oh, I'm like, I bet this is gonna be a bad day.
Yeah.
And so it was. So I got a letter of concern, which local, filed locally, but I got this letter of concern that said like, you're not special. Like, yeah, you've done good things, but guess what? Like, the battalion needs you. You're gonna go to Iraq. Like, if you got a problem with it, like, sucks to suck.
Yeah.
So I found myself on like the torch party. So like the very first people to leave to National Training Center for a NTC rotation. Found myself as like torch party for going to Iraq. I will say like my battalion commander, this was the best lesson I could have gotten. Like my wants, desires, wishes, like all of that. It is subordinate to the needs of the Army. It's subordinate to the unit. And it was a good wake-up call.
So let me ask you a question
Please.
here in regards to this. Okay,
Yeah.
so I'm assuming first lieutenant at this time frame.
First lieutenant, and I actually ended up pinning captain right at the same time frame. And it was funny because like we did not do it because I'd been a nasty boy. I did not have a ceremony. It was more just like I pinned by, it was just a classroom of like me, him, and my commander, and like, here's your captain rank.
So you write this like lipstick manifesto
Yes,
near
yes, correct.
right, to your battalion commander. Okay, so now knowing what you know now and where you are now, let's talk about how if you were the battalion commander receiving this email from another lieutenant, captain, kind of, when you have to balance needs of the organization versus personal aspirations. And so I want you to put your, your current, executive hat on, and this is part of the leadership type stuff. How do you handle that?
I would handle it exactly the way my battalion commander did. He handled it brilliantly. Like as I said before, like I had gotten, not to pat myself on back on the podcast here, but like had been the #1 platoon leader, had been the #1 lieutenant.
So you're a high performer. You're a rock star.
And ultimately, like after I got out as the S4, he gave me as the #1 officer senior rated in the battalion.
Okay.
So he took care of me, and he did right by me. But this was a good wake up call, and I thought he managed it brilliantly. Like it didn't poison our relationship or anything like that. But there was the penance of like, and also I was the S4, so it made a little bit of sense for me to be on kind of the torch parties for these things.
Did he talk to you about the
Oh
email?
yeah, no, he did. And the letter was very cut and like his response, the letter of concern was very cut and dry. But that was also delivered with a stern talking to, but it was one in which I could tell he cared, and he articulated very clearly why, as much as he would love to support my personal professional aspirations in this exact moment, we needed the personnel. Like there was a certain boots on ground number, and quite frankly, like we needed somebody that knew the organization and knew the role that I was going to be stepping into for what we had, and that superseded my personal ambitions. And
does that change the way that you lead now? That kind of, it seems like there's a natural inclination for him to fire back another nasty gram.
Yeah.
There's, I think that there's 3 avenues that I think that he could have done here. He could have like full out, punitive, right? Smashed you, right? There's what he did, or there's like the okay, and then release you, right? To go to follow your own, kind of dreams, if you will, on that. Does that affect you when you have, big challenges now, or, big, personnel management?
So I think, firstly, it certainly informs like how I approach my own professional development, which is like, even now, I still subordinate myself to the mission in a lot of ways. I told you off camera, like I had been doing an executive MBA.
Yeah.
And, I stopped it when I became the executive director of No One Left Behind because I didn't think I could do both jobs well. And I realized that like this mission right now was more important. So the lesson that I learned, at least in my own personal aspiration, has kept with me. And I recognize that like there's a time and place for your own kind of personal ambitions, and then there's a time to get the mission done. Wow. So I do that for myself. Wow. For how I manage the folks that work for No One Left Behind, or how I just manage people that I supervise more generally, I try and approach it where whenever I can, like one of the things I tell people at No One Left Behind, there's nobody on staff that's going to retire out of this job, not a single person. And it's something that like when we're doing job interviews or counseling or anything like that, I tell them. And so something that's very important to me is you need to do professional development. I want to make sure we're setting you up for success. Tell me how we do it. And so I support whenever I can any kind of professional development they want to do. That said, when it's time to work and like there is a requirement that like we need to do this because in the case of No One Left Behind, vulnerable wartime Afghan and Iraqi allies, need us to be there, we have to be there. And so I think it's one of those, it's a balancing act. But, when you have the ability to support and, not just support, but like amplify to help them reach whatever, dreams that they have, professional or personal, you do it. Because there are going to be times where this idea, I'm trying to remember the expression in the Army, it was like, mission first, people always. And it's like, well, that's actually kind of BS, because quite frankly, there are a lot of times where like, I'm not going to be able to support the person. Like the person is going to, and like, sometimes there is just incompatible wants and desires, and there is a zero sum. And so I think it's like, how do you make sure that that person knows you care about them? How do you make sure that you're, putting scaffolding around them so that they can pursue what they want to pursue? And then also recognize that, like, at a certain point, loggerheads happen. And when they happen, unfortunately, like, the mission will take priority.
Very well said. Very well said. Wow. I hope that is a lesson that does resonate with people. Is understanding. I think that the responsibility of a leader is knowing the difference, is knowing when, and especially a seasoned leader. And so the only time that you can become a seasoned leader is through repetition and through seeing different things. And that's part of the cauldron of what I believe of large service organizations, like the military, is you get the chance to see these, feel these, be a part of these things where your own aspirations were, superseded by the aspirations of the mission or by the requirements of the mission itself. Really well said. I think it's a very, very poignant, point you made there.
Well, thank you, AJ. I'm glad that my lipstick manifesto.
I still like the idea.
Turned into this. 100%. Yeah.
I've done my own lipstick manifesto, so I know Christmas Eve duty, right? I'm sitting there with a Carl's Jr. cheeseburger, or everyone else with their family, and I'm like, I'll show you, right? I'm going to write you a strongly worded letter. Good for you. Good for you. Okay. So now you're with this unit still, and you are torch party. I've not heard that term before.
Yeah, so it may be unique to Army. It may actually have been unique to this organization or some of the organizations I've been in. But basically, it's ahead of the advanced party. So it's truly like,
oh wow.
So you've got the in a deployment, you've got the pre-deployment site survey. So the recon for what you're going to do. Then you've got torch, which is the first people showing up to really set condition. It's like Pathfinder, right?
Yeah.
I think that's based on you're lighting the torch.
Holy crap, that totally makes sense.
Yeah.
That totally makes sense. Okay, so now you're the first person to use the term that you said recently, scaffolding, to kind of build the scaffolding to allow the movement of larger forces into a specific area.
So for like the National Training Center context, so for people that don't know, the Army has these big training centers: the National Training Center in California, the Joint Multinational Training Center in Germany, the Joint Readiness Training Center in Louisiana. But for units that were going to go on deployment, one of your big things was like a final kind of certifying exercise where the entire brigade is going there. And it's a big month-long plus, there's live fires, there's force on force with OP4. It's your final kind of conditions check prior to deploying. And so for me as Torch, it was going there, making sure that, billeting was set up because we were shipping tanks and Bradleys. It's making sure that, our rail ops were going to be set up and that we had all that kind of stuff.
The master class that you get from that, from being in part of that, of that, that echeloning of large maneuver elements into an area, especially as the S4, it's so frustrating to me when, we as another podcast in the world of podcasts have to fight the algorithm, right? And the algorithm rewards certain keywords. But I really think what gets lost on the world is a lot of the minutia that establishes the ability for these organizations, these units, these men and women to be able to do these things.
Yeah.
And I have been part of, a torch party before, and my God, the amount of PowerPoints and Excel documents and conferences and sitting around the table, rubbing your eyebrows till there's nothing left, right? Trying to figure out these very complex problems.
It was one of those, I didn't appreciate it until I was getting out of the Army, because I remember I was building my first resume, because I never needed one. And I remember the best bullet point that I had was from my time as an S4, where I'm talking about, okay, we moved this amount of money.
Quantity, dollar amount, right?
And yeah, exactly. And I'm like able to say, okay, well, I instituted these new property requirements, our standards for checking property, and we managed our organizational property and our theater provided equipment, and it's $120 million, and we didn't lose any. And I was like, oh wow, this looks good for industry. So is it the sexy thing that jogs the algorithm of like, okay, we're fast roping out a helicopter?
Yeah.
No. But what your listeners really want to hear is about railhead operations and property maintenance. But no, it really was a great, it sucked, hated it, wanted to be, killing bad guys. But in retrospect, one of the more formative jobs I've ever had that taught me logistics and sustainment in a way that I hadn't never had any experience before in.
When I wrote my first resume for a business school, I was accepted, but I did get a talking to, not a negative, but like more of a professional thing of being like, hey, that's really neat that you were a scout sniper. That's really cool that you were a force recon Marine. Nobody knows what that means. And frankly, nobody in industry, unless you're going to be a scout sniper or like, if you're going into an industry where it's logistics, manpower management, right, whatever, budgeting, how fast you can shoot a target at what distance does not matter.
Yeah.
Right. You have to think in a, like tangible assets, procuring, moving, managing the dollar, the money amounts, whatever that may be. Those are the things that I think that is very tough when it comes for a transition for a veteran leaving service, because you and I could sit and speak acronyms to one another for 45 minutes and have a full-on conversation that zero people outside of our industry would understand. That means a ton to us. But when you're looking to go outside of our own industry, we have to be better at translating what that intent into action, or that action into tangible results for a larger context. So I think that's huge.
Totally. And I will say it echoes to one of the things that we heard from our Ranger instructors at the end too, which is like, you show up to a unit and you're like, great, you've got your Ranger tab. Instant credibility until you open your mouth. And like, I think it's certainly, I think that's true of veterans like transitioning.
Yep. My own personal opinion here is that there are a lot of tropes that are kind of surround veterans, right? The idea of a broken veteran or the idea of PTSD or any of those kind of things, which are very real and very, I think things that are out there. But I also want people to not be afraid of hiring veterans, because there's a whole host of really good things that come along with that, as you're talking about. Some of the intangibles, right? The discipline, the self-actualization, right? To be able to drive through teamwork, team dynamics, being able to put mission first, right? And so, but if I put sniper too much on my tech resume, they're gonna be like, oh God, right? Is this guy gonna like go postal?
Are we hiring a sniper?
Yeah, exactly. Is that what the job description looks like, right?
I think you're dead on. And it's one of those, like, I appreciate how I think veterans are more open about some of their struggles with transition and kind of whether it be post-traumatic stress, whether it be TBI, whether it just be kind of a loss in ego or id because you're transition. But at the same time, like, I want us to be comfortable, but I also hate the idea of like, oh, I'm this disgruntled veteran.
Yeah,
like,
dude.
I've got the bumper sticker that says, stay back 100 yards, you will be shot. Like, don't do that.
Yeah.
Like, I don't. It doesn't benefit you. It doesn't benefit veterans more broadly. I think there's a way in which we can talk about the struggles that people that have seen combat or just served in the military can have, while recognizing that they are also, contributing members of society that can thrive and bring unique things. And when we get into this, like, oh, the broken veteran trope, it drives me up the wall.
Definitely. Well said. Well said. Okay, so now you guys finish up at NTC. Not to gloss over that, but that was a lot of work, I'm sure, to be able to get there.
We're good. Yeah, we're rounds complete on NTC. So, we finish up at NTC and then we deploy to Iraq. This is like, it's no longer even Operation Rocky Freedom. It's Operation New Dawn. I think for a lot of us, we're like, come on, man. Like, let's go to, this is now surge in Afghanistan. Like, let's go fight the fight. And it very much, I know we were watching the patch chart of like, come on, fingers crossed, Afghanistan. Like, we want to get into the fight. We don't want to go, babysit Iraq. But we go to Iraq. We were kind of split. We had half of our companies and our headquarters, myself included, at Assad Air Base in Western Anbar. And then we had the other half. They were closer towards Baghdad. They're actually on the eastern side of Baghdad, but I cannot remember. Fob Hammer, maybe. Okay, doesn't matter. Bottom line, like, we were kind of split. The other two companies were, I think, training Iraqi army, some presence patrol. For us, we actually manned the BDOC. So we were in charge of Assad Air Base for from like June through December of 2011. So we shut Assad down. And for me, it was a difficult job because we're shutting down. Well, at that point, it became the MNFI headquarters, so Multinational Forces Iraq headquarters. Or if it wasn't the headquarters, it was at least like a ton of the staff there. And our job was to secure the base and then also just like turn stuff over. So like, how are we getting rid of the equipment? You think we've been there for 8 years now, the amount of just crap that we have. And it's like, what can we turn over to the Iraqis? What do we want to ship home? What are we just going to actually ship off to be destroyed?
Who makes those decisions?
Your boy.
No way.
No, I mean, it was parts of, for some of our stuff, yes. For some of it, it was like theater property book managers that were doing it, and so it's DA civilians, or it's chief warrant officer fives that just work on property books. But then they're telling me like, okay, here's all of these connexes of crap, like make it happen, like figure out how to do it. And we didn't have a ton of assets, and so it just led to some kind of fascinating math and logistics problems of like, okay, how do we make sure that we have the sustainment assets to like help with this? We had like 1,000 non-tactical vehicles that we were going to turn over to the Iraqis. That's like kind of a lot of stuff to take care of.
At the same time, you still need to maintain a security presence, right?
Yes.
Then there's the military training arm presence, right?
Yep.
So you guys are spread in a lot of not only different areas, but different, I would say, warfighting functions.
Totally. And I like the most fascinating part was like how we left. So we're securing Al Assad, and it was amazing. Like none of these like random majors and E8s and the people that work on staff at echelons above reality were like, get out, man. Like we have way too many people. Like we need people to leave because we're closing this thing. Like we have to be out of here by December 31st based on like that's when the mission's rolling. And so we're trying to get people out of here. And I will say the way that it finally kind of wound down is like we closed the DFAC, and in like early November was like
mid-rats.
Yeah, it was true. It was like MREs, and now it was like, okay, all these staffers like rats fleeing the ship. They're like, all right, we're out of here. But the way that we work this is like we had secured Al Assad's a major airfield. You can land C-5 Galaxies. You can land. So we had secured it, like got everyone off except for our battalion that was then going to road march. And so the other thing is like, how did we make sure that we're turning in all of these assets? And then there were some other fun things like, okay, we've gotten rid of everything, and then we find a connex in the container shipping yard that has like a whole bunch of Hellfire missiles in it.
Oh,
so like
can't write that off.
Can't write that one off. Like, can we find a theater asset to come pick this crap up when we're like closing the base in 3 days? Or do I now have to use one of my limited sustainment assets to bring this connex out? There were also like the interesting rules. EFPs had been a huge thing. And there were 1,000 different variants of mine-resistant, ambush-protected vehicles, the MRAPs. Well, for us, we had this thing where, okay, the regulation had changed, and we now needed to have like the extra armor on these MRAPs. So the not just the MRAP, but like the standoff armor that's going to defeat or degrade a explosively formed penetrator IED. And so it's like, oh crap, like you guys have just changed this regulation now. Now we're like, I gotta like turn these MRAPs in and try and find other MRAPs. And so working with our S3 shop of like, okay, how are we going to crew, we're going to road march from Western Anbar to Kuwait. And we're going to have to
I've done that drive the other direction. It's a long drive.
It's a long drive. And there's not like theater assets anymore. So like, what is your bump plan if like you hit an IET? What's your bump plan if this vehicle just decides to take a crap? Like, how do you have enough like assets to tow? Like all of these things. And so just a fascinating kind of, mental problem as we thought about this. And, I will say like I remember thinking like, okay, I wonder if this is going to be like, it was a relatively quiet deployment. There was a big attack on like a Iraqi police station, suicide vests, folks came in, killed a whole bunch of people. But besides that, really nothing happened. And really American forces were not molested with. And I wasn't sure, we weren't sure when we were like leaving, like, okay, have they just decided they're going to like have some sort of spectacular attack on one of our 5, because we split into like 5 different serials, and I commanded the 4th serial. So it was the second last serial out. And, we were wondering like, is there going to be some spectacular attack to show like we beat the Americans, we made them run away?
Tail between their legs, got them on their way out.
Or was it they're going to basically like save up their weapons and, wait till we were gone so they could, start it. And it ended up being the latter because, the remnants of AQI became ISIS, and we left in 2011, and by 2014 they had seized like a third of Iraq and had seized Al Assad. So really it was a pretty quiet road march out. I think there was one IED strike that like was a pre-det and didn't hit anybody, and just a smooth ride. I will say we were driving, I think it's ASR Michigan that cuts through Fallujah. Naturally, if I'm going to have a breakdown, you know it's gonna be there. And so I remember like we broke down in the like right in the like heart of it on ASR Michigan. And I'm like, okay, like
Here it is, boys.
all right, boys, like get ready. And managed to recover the vehicle and like just kept moving. Like
No
the
kidding.
Rockies are like, nah, got nothing for you.
No
You know?
kidding.
Yeah.
And so we're able to close down, and you left Iraq into Kuwait when?
Would have been like December 12th, December 15th of 2011.
Oh, on time, on target. So
Yeah.
got out of there before December 31st.
We did indeed. So we were like the last unit out of Ambar. And then it was funny. We got to Kuwait, and I remember we were going to keep one brigade basically in Kuwait for another like 6. You know, we us in 4th Brigade, 1st AD, and then some brigade from 1st Cavalry Division. We each had like 6 months left for our year long. And it's like one of us is going to have to stay in Kuwait to guard in case like something happens with Iran. And we basically just want to have some, you know, theater QRF.
How did you guys decide that?
I certainly didn't, but I was just like, all right, man, we're going to say the prayers. Like, I don't want to sit at Camp Buring for 6 months. And thankfully, my buddies in 1st Cav got to stay and eat that one. And we came home. Yeah.
You know, I wonder if they like flipped a coin or something like that, you know, or like when you're waiting for the volunteer and everyone's looking around, like who's going to do it? You're like, I wonder what that meeting was like to decide.
I really hope that like the 1st Cav brigade commander was just really ambitious.
It was
for
like
a start. He's
gung-ho.
like,
Oh, we'll do it.
we got you. Listen, just make sure you remember me on the general promotion. We got this bad boy. So.
Damn.
But yeah, so it was a good deployment. It ended up being a rewarding deployment. At the time, it was like, I hate this. Like this is miserable. I'm working, 20 hours a day. I hate my life. Like my buddies are tracking Taliban. I'm sitting here like trying to make sure I've got RFID tags for the trucks that we're gonna ship.
Sure.
Like what even am I doing here? So I was close to getting out. But I'm glad I didn't, because then I would have missed Afghanistan.
No kidding. All right. So now you guys you guys have just gotten back from your second tour.
Yep.
Right. And now you're back in Fort Bliss, Texas.
Only very briefly. So
did you ever unpack in Fort Bliss, Texas?
No, not really. So with this one, because I knew I was going to go on to the captain's career course, so I never actually got like an apartment or anything. I came home. One of my good buddies, real dear friend from VMI, he and I had lived together before. I just moved into his apartment for like 3 weeks, and
couch surfing. Right?
Oh, well, it was truly gruesome because we got back like December 22nd. My ex-wife, her mom was we weren't married at the time, but she was my fiance. Her mom was sick. She couldn't come see me. My parents were busy. My buddy picked me up on the 22nd. I got real drunk at TGI Fridays, and then he went home, to see his parents for for Christmas. And so I just like hung out in my buddy's apartment, just like, all right, well, let's see how much Busch Light we can drink and hang out and feel sad for myself.
I've done the exact same thing.
But it's real. Unfortunately, like both of my Iraq deployments, first one came back late. It was probably like 2 a.m. or 1 a.m. Had nowhere to go, and so me and who ended up being my roommate but was a fellow platoon leader, we just hung out at Hardee's until daylight. Like just sat in Hardee's with like a rucksack and sea bag, waiting for daylight so we could get a cab to go, pick up our cars, move into an apartment. We just kind of hung out. And I think it happens to a lot more veterans, or used to anyways. Like then we realize it's like,
this
all right.
Unceremonious.
Yeah.
You survive something where there's this literal, regardless, and I know that you're being very kind and you're, and very humble, and you're downplaying the threat in Iraq during your time, but on both deployments, the threat of, absolute carnage is very, very real. And then you just come home and you're sitting in the parking lot of a TGI Fridays or of a Hardee's, right? And it's just over. Like that's the weirdest portion. And you're like, 24 hours ago, I was in a place that couldn't be more foreign, right? 48 hours before that, I was in a place where people were actively trying to cause harm to me or my mission or my compatriots. Yeah. And now I'm just sitting in a parking lot, at a Waffle House, somewhere in the middle of nowhere. Yeah. And, sitting on this curb and being like, gosh, what, and just reeling with all that.
Yeah.
How did you cope?
Probably not well. It's one of those, especially for the first two, the Iraq deployments, like that second one, like we weren't allowed to leave. So even though we got back because we had not done reverse SRP, well, we came back like, 3 days before Christmas.
Oh yeah.
We didn't get a chance to do that reverse deployment kind of health screening and all of that. And so, we had a pass. We didn't have to come into work, but we weren't allowed to leave. And so for me, it's like, okay, cool. Like I'm just here by myself. So I'm just going to kind of hang out. And my Christmas meal was like McDonald's and, 14 bush lattes. And it was like, oh, all right, cool. It's good times. So, I think, I don't know that playing video games and watching trash TV and drinking beers by yourself is the best way to do it. But like realistically, that's what happened. And I wasn't dealing with any PTS from Iraq or anything like that. But it was more the stupidity of it. Of like, okay, we've been away from loved ones for I think it was a 8-month deployment or something, or 9-month deployment. We've been away from loved ones for over half a year at least. And it's like, we're just, if we don't happen to have family here in El Paso, we just kind of are going to like sit here and look at each other. Like, that's pretty stupid.
That's the weird sometimes that you get, I say that a lot of times is that policy that is cut with a broadsword hurts everybody. And so when it's one of these things where you make this blanket statement, we're not going to release people back to wherever because of the idea of risk, right? Of risk to the service or whatever it is, that we make a very brash decision that ends up causing more harm than good. When, I don't know that regardless, I don't think that humans are people or creatures that want to be isolated, especially when you're kind of, decongesting, whatever it is, whatever the right word is for that. But when you're coming back from this huge culture shock, and then you're just sitting in this place, it just feels, it feels like extra lonely in this space when you're already on Christmas, already by yourself. And now you've come back from relieving all of this weight and all of the stress and all of the things. And then it's the finality of it and we're not looking for a ticker tape parade, but like the unacknowledged effort and sacrifice to be sitting there alone. I'm really sorry that happened.
Yeah, and I appreciate it. And now I will say now it's like I look back on it almost as like humor. It's humorous. It was so silly. And at the time, I was a little hurt, but enough time and space. But it is definitely one of those. The road to hell is paved with good intentions, and it's the policy was without question not meant to be malicious or anything. It certainly was to make sure that soldiers are okay, that as they try and decompress from coming back from a war zone, that they're safe. And unfortunately, it was instituted pretty ham-handed. So but anyways, so I get back. I'm only at the unit for about 3 weeks or so, and then went on leave, and then went to the captain's career course. And so for the Army, you go to a captain's career course. For me, it was the maneuver captain's career course, which is I think about 6 months or so, and really was a good experience. Went back to Fort Benning because basically anything infantry or maneuver is at Fort Benning, Georgia, and it was good. It was nice to be back. I spent a fair amount of time with my fiance, and was it did make for like a little bit of tough because she was doing a externship in Panama City Beach, and so I would drive back and forth between Benning and Panama City Beach, and she would very rarely come to Benning because I lived exactly as you'd expect, like a 26-year-old bachelor to live, and it's like I slept on an air mattress, and she's like, okay, I'm not. Nope, you can come see me.
And the hotels around Benning aren't very nice either. I spent a lot of time at Benning, and I also spent time in Panama City for our dive schools in Panama City.
Oh, very nice.
And so I spent time there. Much nicer accoutrement, right?
For sure.
In Panama City.
Yeah. So, but it was good, and really, it was fantastic training. I mean, it's classroom based, but you're learning how to do a company level op order, and learning above the troop leading procedures and actually how operations are planned was good. And so it was nice. That was a good 6 months off, and then I went to 3rd Brigade, 1st ID, which again no longer exists anymore, but was
the kiss of death.
Truly, but fantastic unit. Absolutely loved it. They were out of Fort Knox, Kentucky.
Cool.
Had a great leadership team. Our colonel was a guy by the name of William Osland. If you've ever seen Restrepo, he was the battalion commander from Restrepo.
No kidding.
So he was my brigade commander. Phenomenal commander. Sergeant Major Myers was our brigade command sergeant major, a big Ranger Regiment guy. He was fantastic. And so I had a great command team. I went there and unfortunately had to serve my time on brigade staff, and so got to got to be a brigade staffer for about 7 months or so, through a rotation to JRTC in Louisiana. And then after that, we went to Afghanistan and was our brigade chief of operations for a little while.
Wow.
Yeah.
Where in Afghanistan did you guys go?
Zabul Province. So Zabul is Regional Command South. It's in between Kandahar on the west, Uruzgan in the north, and Ghazni in the east.
Okay. How long were you guys there for?
So it was a 9-month deployment. My first month, I was, like I said, the brigade chief of operations, and then was lucky enough to take a rifle company about a month and a half into the deployment.
And now, why is that? So
From the operations section, you're a post maneuver captain's career course commander,
Yep.
or captain, I should say. So you're staring down the barrel of major, you're getting close to that, and you're then
moved into a company commander position. Why that company commander position?
Well, so for me, quite frankly, that was like the reward for having done well at brigade staff. I needed company command time for the Army, or at least for infantry guys. You need, I think it's at least 1 year of command time. And for me, I done well. My brigade commander liked me, and so this was a reward for having done well at at brigade chops level. And he gave me what truly was like the best, kind of the best experience that I could have asked for. We had this hybrid company where I had infantry platoons. But we also had probably like a dozen or so majors, captains, NCOs that were part of our security forces assistance mission.
Okay.
And so I had both maneuver elements and then the staffers, and they would do, they would go and liaise with the Afghan National Army, because they were at a FOB right next to the American FOB. And so it was great because I was, we had transitioned as an infantry brigade combat team to a security forces assistance brigade combat team. And, it meant that a lot of our units were kind of split up. My sister infantry battalion was doing the village stability operations thing. And so they were doing that. Our Rista was up working for the Germans near Mazar-e Sharif.
What's Rista?
Reconnaissance surveillance target acquisition. So basically our cavalry squadron in this light infantry unit.
Okay, cool.
And for us, my infantry battalion, we had one company that was doing kind of base daily operations. I was like the one maneuver company that we had, which was a lot of fun for me because, again, I had lost some of my combat power that was stuck doing village stability stuff. But then I had other platoons that were doing, work for me. I had, we would consistently get a route clearance platoon that was take on to me. And so we would do, they were awesome. They were a Arizona National Guard unit, and they were great, but they would come and work for me. And so what was awesome is we were like the one kind of maneuver company for the battalion. And so kind of got to go all over, made for a really fun deployment. We were trying to help the Afghan National Army with their targeting cycle.
Okay.
And it was not as developed as I think the American targeting is.
Sure.
And instead it was much more like, all right, well, this month we are going to go to Daeshapan, and we're going to drive up there and we're going to fight anything we see on the way in, and we will
put a stick in a hornet's nest,
exactly.
right, and see what comes out. And then fight it.
Yeah. But that was, but it made for some really cool experiences. I mean, we would do the Daeshapan one that I just mentioned. It was a giant, ground movement up to part of the province that really had very little Afghan National Security Force control, a lot of Taliban. And it was like, my route clearance platoon, an infantry platoon, and then, like the entirety of the Afghan National Army brigade behind me. And, we'd be doing route clearance for them because they were trying to resupply this one kind of outpost FOB that was just A&A surrounded by Taliban. And so it was like, okay, we're going to go bring them all of their supplies for the winter. Because we also were trying to make sure that how this is, I should contextualize, this is 2013.
Okay.
And so we're at a point where, we're post-surge. The country is not pacified, though. Certainly after you get away from Highway 1, the country is not pacified. But we're trying to build up the A&A. And so, we're not going to just come in and bring CH-47s and drop off all the stuff. Like, how do we get you to resupply yourself? Now, we're still going to help you because we're going to do the route clearance, and we'll have, American infantry platoons there that are also going to be, talking to American CAS and attack aviation. But how do we kind of force you to develop more? So it made for just kind of really interesting missions where we would, clear the way for them to go up there. We would do mixed air assaults. So we would do, a platoon of my guys and 2 platoons of theirs. And we would just go all over the province and see, new interesting people and fun firefights. And it was truly the best experience of my life. And I, it's been tough after getting out of the Army because it was such a great deployment for me, where it's like, man, if you could only, chase that dragon, because, being a commander and getting that opportunity and just that deployment generally was just such a rewarding experience for me.
So I have a couple questions for you. So you now cut your teeth twice in Iraq, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you had done this at different levels with a very different mission set in Iraq than people traditionally associate with the Iraqi campaign, right? So you were there to help, stabilize, close down, and then retrograde out of Iraq.
Yep.
In Afghanistan, this was a little bit different. What would you say were the largest differences between what you saw mission set wise and population wise between Iraq and Afghanistan?
Okay. Firstly, I think as I looked at like the government that had existed in Iraq versus Afghanistan, I was so much more hopeful about what could have happened in Iraq than what happened in Afghanistan. So, and I'll get into like what we did differently, but one of the things that stands out for me, I remember I talked about, road marching from Anbar to Kuwait. And I remember we were like driving through Baghdad and there was this, female Iraqi policeman directing traffic and we didn't get attacked. And there was a semblance of a state there that I'm like, this place is going to be all right. Yeah. And obviously like ISIS happened, but when you look at Iraq now, like Iraq here now is actually doing pretty well. And don't get me wrong, it's got like Iranian influence. There are certainly plenty of ISIS that still operate in the hinterlands of the West and North. But it is a real country in a way that like Afghanistan, I felt like every valley you went into was a different country from the valley around it.
The tribal component for me was always something that I don't know that the nuance that the United States really understood was the tribal component.
Yeah. The tribal component, there was obviously the different ethnicities within Iraq, Kurds versus Arabs. There were different religious, communities from Shia and Sunni to, smaller religions. But I think that was taken to, an even greater level in Afghanistan.
Mm-hmm.
When you look at how many different, Pashto, Tajik, Turkmen, Uzbek, the Hazara, the amount of different like religions, ethnicities, tribes, and I think just as a country, like I said, every valley every valley was its own feudal state, and that's at least kind of how I saw it, and so it was just very interesting. For me, it was always a mixed bag, both in Iraq and Afghanistan, with the local national security forces. And I say, one of the things I hadn't mentioned is like we were attacked with indirect fire in Iraq, and it was amazing how many times the POO site, the point of origin, was like within eye shot, like of an Iraqi police checkpoint. Like, man, boys, very sneaky. They were 100 yards from you. Managed to shoot some rockets and then get out. That's weird. So there were great Iraqis we worked with. There were great Afghans we worked with. There were ones that weren't as good. And so for me, our mission set, I think by the time I got to Iraq, it was a little more stabilized. Don't get me wrong. We still did plenty of kind of key leader engagement with Iraqi security forces. But for Afghans, we were definitely trying to build them up. And I don't think they had quite as professionalized a force. And also just that country. It's a rough country. The thing that America does better than any other military, our special operators are incredible and unique, but our logistics, our ability to sustain ourselves, to move people, is unmatched. And when you look at what we were asking the Afghans to do to try and, sustain themselves and hold territory in places that it's really tough to, it's just a very, very difficult mission for them.
They're almost tribal by geography, right? And isolated because of geography itself. And so then you have these natural I don't know, I would say these sects of people that develop inside of these tribal regions because they're regionally separated from other people. And so they learn how to survive, sustain, subsist on their own individual, I would say identities that are different or compartmentalized from the valley over. And so when we're trying to layer over the behemoth of American military, logistics might, that's not something that may be able to be sustained by a nation that doesn't have the same resources.
100%.
Interesting.
Yeah, 100%. And one of the things that I remember thinking to myself, I was so optimistic when we left Afghanistan, or when we left Iraq. And it was one of those we didn't get attacked when we road marched from Western Anbar to Kuwait. And then I remember thinking when we were in Afghanistan, we basically, if you left Highway 1, there was a pretty decent shot that we were going to either hit an IED, get shot at, a little bit of both. And I remember we were a brigade that was going to be replaced by a battalion. And I remember thinking to myself, okay, if this is the security situation, I know it's not going to get better as fewer Americans are there. And I just remember thinking to myself, we are so totally screwed here. And so, cut to, this is again 2013 into 2014, when people are like, oh my god, I can't believe Afghanistan fell so quickly. It was like, what the hell were you looking at, man?
Interesting.
This idea that it came out of nowhere was always so kind of galling to me, because it's no, you absolutely should have seen it coming, anecdotally, just from what I saw. But then also, if you look at
it was fractured from the beginning.
Oh, fractured.
And remain fractured.
100%.
Compartmentalized, right? So to be able to think that we could layer over a monolithic kind of entity over the top of them, for anybody that had lived in that state, right, would be like, wow, this is the natural conclusion to a sentence that had been written already, right?
Well, and especially, the idea that we had a time-based limit on the surge, right? We have the watches, they have the time. They know that we have an endpoint here.
Right. Time rather than condition was the ending for us.
And so, to me, it was okay, this couldn't be surprising. And I remember the Foundation for Defense of Democracies has, it's called the Long War Journal, but they had a great interactive map. And it looked at basically, it laid out every district in every province in Afghanistan. And it showed, was it, the government of Afghanistan controlled, was it Taliban controlled, was it contested? And it's great because it gives you a month-by-month time lapse. And, from 2013 onward, you're just seeing okay, the hinterland districts are all falling. And it's so this idea that we were so surprised in, July and August of 2021, it's I wasn't.
No kidding.
And I'm not that smart.
My experience in Afghanistan was completely different than your experience in Afghanistan, because I was in the Helmand province, I was in the Nowzad Valley, whatever it was, and we were running, missions against, a very kinetic enemy in a very specific place. But my worldview was, I was kind of surface level, right? I wasn't seeing the macro perspective. I was very much interested on this very small valley that you're talking about, which is very different than the valley next to it. And you're able to kind of get your head above water and see a lot further and a lot deeper into I would say, the macro level picture.
I think you give me too much, because, the other thing that I do, think about is we had two, there were two major ground movements that we did where, again, we're trying to help resupply on behalf of the Afghan National Army. And it's us, we're going to clear to, we're going to do route clearance to it. And then we're going to kick out and we're going to do, clearance operations, around the FOBs, and, make sure that we're building a little bit of space around the ANA FOBs. And I remember thinking the amount of IEDs we hit, we had great route clearance, and we had, great, engineers that were using, the articulating, ground penetrating radar, doing everything we can to identify these IEDs. And we bipped a ton of them. And actually, I'll talk about just how amazing our Afghan EOD was.
BIP is blown in place?
Blown in place.
Okay, so you found them.
Found them.
Okay.
But even if you're only finding 80% of them on the route, or 90% of them on the route, or 95% of them on the route, well, if there are 50 of them, that still is going to be a fair amount of IED strikes. And so in both of these, I can remember we attrited 90% of our ground penetrating radar tractors. We blew them up.
Wow.
Couldn't, and such that we're in one case we just didn't have enough recovery assets. The There was a forward support company that went with us. So another American unit, but it was just pure logistics assets to support us. We'd have traded so much stuff that we like left it and dropped a bomb on it because just couldn't do anything with it. In one of them, like we were trying to go through, there's only one way to get in. It's this valley, and there were so many victim operated IEDs that we had destroyed so many assets that we ended up having to leave, and we didn't want to like risk doing it with fuelers, so we ended up having to leave our fuelers and the FSC back, and we still have like another 30-kilometer movement, and we were getting so low that we ended up having to like set up, for lack of a better term, a FARP to like refuel ourselves. But it was but we're not aircraft, we didn't have a FARP, so it was literally just like they brought us just giant drums of JP8 and a hand pump. I'm not even joking. So we're like refueling a company's worth of MRAPs with a hand pump.
Oh my gosh.
Because they had slowed the logistics train so much, they had slowed your advance so much that you had to be able to stop and now refuel everything.
Yes.
Be able to continue this like trudge, right, like through this valley to be able to get to the point of where you were trying to resupply in the first place.
Yeah.
It was this death of 1,000 cuts.
Oh, 100%. And, sometimes it would be, a little more complex where they're going to, do direct fire ambushes while it's, right where we're going to hit these. Some of them where they just truly like defense in depth, and they have just placed, probably hundreds. We found, like I said, there was one that I know we bipped at least 45 separate IEDs. Sometimes there were, multiple yellow point containers. So it was an IED that kind of had multiple components to it, but at least 45 separate ones in one go.
That's, the amount of time that would take.
Oh yeah.
Right. Like we're talking weeks to be able to maneuver in like down this like route clearance. How do you guys sustain through all of that?
Well, and that's the thing. We spend the time, we blow up all of these assets, and thank God, we had a few ID strikes where, people got screwed up, but, didn't have any amputees, had people that we had to medevac, but, thankfully they were returned to duty. Again, thank God for MRAPs and for engineering vehicles that like kept us safe, because it's amazing to see like, axles get blown off and everybody inside is okay. But we would do these things where we blew up all these things. We got to Bellsprung and like we cleared it, and then we drove back, and it's like, okay, the A&A are not going to patrol that. They're not going to go down Route Chicken again. Yeah, like that is just, excuse my language, that is just going to be reseated.
As soon as we walk away, it's like you're putting your hand inside of a bucket, and as soon as you pull your hand out of that bucket, the water returns, right? To where it's at. So how did you, as a commander, compare the mission objectives right now? Because we talked about this before with like the mission taking precedence, but the people being always. How did you manage the pressure of wanting to accomplish the mission, but also the preservation of American and human lives as you're going through that? How did you weigh that?
I knew it was important, and I will say, like at the time, I was overly optimistic that like by supporting the Afghan National Army this way, they were going to professionalize. I say professionalize. I don't want to like put it on the Afghans we work with, because we're asking them to resupply themselves, and it's like they don't have anything to do it with. Like they were plenty brave, they were plenty smart, but like they have no ability. The core level, the theater level, the Ministry of Defense level for them just wasn't there. But at the time, I was telling myself like, okay, we see these dudes every day, because the other thing is like, because we were SFAB and we had we had people going over to the A&A FOB every day and working with them. They were truly brothers in arms, because like for me, the officer that I worked with was their brigade operations officer and their brigade XO. So I saw these dudes 4 days a week, 5 days a week. Like we grew close to them. We had an affinity with them. My soldiers, saw the same, enlisted Afghans day in and day out. So like they wanted to accomplish the same mission too. Like they wanted to make sure that if these guys are going to go into the hinterlands, they didn't want to be left alone to get tuned up. And so for us, it was, it was easier to go out and do that. And I told myself though that, this is going to help them kind of develop into the force that is needed to secure it.
So let's put our
our hindsight lenses on for a second. And now knowing what you know now, after going through that type of fight, what would you have done differently on a geopolitical scale, on a strategic scale, that you would have done to be able to insulate the achievements that we had gained during that time frame?
I mean, this is the easy answer is we needed more troops to hold, like, it's one of those, we should not have had a time-based end to the surge. So we needed more, quite frankly, we needed more troops. But in absence of that, like assuming that we didn't, I think we asked the Afghans to hold more ground than they could. And so it is like, how do we determine what is both the key terrain, that's key geographic terrain, but then key human terrain as well? How do we make sure that we're massing forces there to hold that? And unfortunately, how are we going to have to kind of write off some of the other areas? And that's imperfect because, quite frankly, that allows the enemy, that allowed the Taliban areas to resupply, refit, to basically gain combat power. So it's difficult. That's an imperfect answer, but that is how I kind of would think about it, because I don't know that there's a point in driving to Deshapan, getting the EOD platoon, the Afghan EOD platoon leader, who was incredible, got killed, blowing up an IED in front of us. It's one we had identified. He and two other guys went up there to BIP it, and he got killed. I'm not sure if it was an anti-tamper switch or if they just did something wrong, but got killed. And you now have lost that combat power. And it's like, okay, great, we cleared this route that the Afghans aren't going to drive down for another year, and you just lost a really competent lieutenant that, like, what could he have done? What would his effects been on that unit kind of long term had he not gotten killed? And great, we cleared that route for it to just be reseated, within 2 weeks.
How do you maintain morale through that? Your own morale as well as your soldiers' morale?
We had, again, I think at the time, it's important to remember this is 2013. I think if we knew what would happen in 2021, it would have been a lot harder. We were lucky in that, like, we didn't have anyone get killed. We had Purple Hearts from dudes getting, bells rung. We had an NCO got shot in the hand, but we didn't have any serious injuries, which was, like, again, but by the grace of God goes I, because I'll tell an IED story here in a second, but, like, thankfully we did not have anyone get killed within my company, but we were having fun firefights, and I think we were optimistic about what the future held. And I had some just really, I talked about stepping into kind of a tough situation as a platoon leader. I stepped into a great one here. It was a great company that had kind of a high esprit de corps, that had great NCOs, that the troops were bought in. And so it was easier because it was guys getting to do, cool things. No one actually getting hurt, not permanently hurt. And we were putting it on them. And, it was obviously tough, like, when we would, especially that Afghan EOD platoon leader, because, like, he was somebody that had worked with us a bunch. That sucks. But for us, it was a good deployment. And I think it's because we also didn't know what would happen in, like, 2021 with, all of the work kind of fading away.
So you mentioned the term that I want to key in on, and you have the choice of whether to answer this question or not. But you mentioned the term fun firefights, and you said it a couple of different times.
Have I? Okay.
So let's unpack that a little bit. I want to dive deeper into that, because I think that the American public has this idea of what a firefight is, or some of the questions that I've received as a veteran myself is, why do you find a firefight fun? Can you help to unpack that idea, the psychological component of why a soldier or service member would want to seek that, at the same time is why we see that as some sort of validation of who we are as soldiers?
Okay. Yes. And I'll tell you, this is the biggest tactical failing I had as a commander. To illustrate this, is two different firefights that happened. So we are on, again, it's a ground movement. We are hit a bunch of IEDs. We're driving up to Deshapan. We get into a firefight. This is on the movement up to the FOB. And we get into a firefight. We dismount vehicles. it's a relatively brief firefight. We start maneuvering on them. They, manage to disappear. And so before we could fix them with ISR or anything else, they, use the terrain and get out of there before we can do anything. Cool. So get back in our vehicles, drive forward a little more, get into another good firefight. And again, we start maneuvering on them. But this time we're able to, we think, fix them because they now have assets on station. Because we were in a firefight, I have assets on station. I've got ISR. And this is kind of a larger one. And, I have one platoon maneuvering, dismounted. I have another platoon that's set up a vehicle mounted support by fire. My dismounted platoon is moving forward. And we have ISR above us that thinks we've identified the things we've identified where we're being shot at. And it's there's basically like all in line with me is a wadi, a village, and then a ridge line behind the village. And we are maneuvering. I think it's coming from a mix of the village and the ridge line, but my ISR tells me no, there's dudes in the wadi in between. That's the closest thing to me that's shooting at you. And I'm like, I don't think so, but it is coming on azimuth. I know I'm being shot from there. Like, look, man, we're seeing it from this, MC-12. That's I don't know, maybe it was an MC-12. Anyway, some ISR that's above me. It's like, hey, telling you you're being shot there. I'm like, hey, roger that. Like, we'll maneuver on it. We've got Apaches that are inbound. Like, hey, we're good. And they're like, no, hold fast. We're gonna drop a bomb on it. And I'm like, but we're good. Like, they're like, no, we're gonna drop. And I'm like, okay. Well, I'm also worried about like, where are the Afghan National Army? So I talked to the ANAXO, and I'm like, hey, you and I right now, are we the forward line of troops? Like, we are it. And he's like, yes. And I'm like, you're sure of this? He's like, yes. And I'm like, all right. Like, and I'm like, hey, Roger, here's forward line of troops for both me and the ANA is me here, me in the south, my platoon in the west, like anything, another platoon in the west, anything north and east of us is, you're good. And they're like, okay, cool. Like, that's the dudes in the wadi are Taliban then. So this is one of those, like, again, but by the grace of God, drop on it. And as I understand it, JDAMs need like a certain amount of time to flight to like properly arm. Mm-hmm. And I think they dropped 2-0 because this JDAM just plows lands in the middle of like 6 Afghans, and they ended up being Afghan National Army. Like, lands in the absolute middle of them. Thank God it doesn't hit anyone because like it's 250-pound bomb that would have just killed him had it just run into him. Missed them, did not detonate, and buried itself like 15 feet down into the ground. And we hear like, suddenly the ANA radio is freaking out, and and we're like, holy shit. So anyways, we then are like, okay, we got to, at that point, because a bomb just got dropped, even though it didn't go off, you now have, an F-15 that had just made a really low pass. They break contact, they being the Taliban. We kind of clear through. It's like, holy, that was insane. Like, thank God these ANA didn't get killed. Like, that was rough. The mission continues. Like, mission continues. Like, later that day, we have a heavy machine gun. Pretty sure it was Dishka from like, 2 hilltops away, just raining fire on us. And I can remember there was a AC-130 that was, as part of this whole mission, like, we had Navy SEALs that were doing something in another valley over that was
a lot of assets.
We did. But I can remember this thing shooting at us, and this AC-130, we're trying to get it for priorities of fire, and it's like, nah, sorry, like, SEALs are in a tick, we're going to them. And I'm just like, oh, man. So anyways, I say mission continues. We go up, we do what we had to do with the FOB, we're coming back down, and now it's like, okay, we have this bomb that has been dropped. We have a JDAM just sitting in the earth.
Can't just leave it.
Can't just leave it. So now, like, 6 days later, we're going to come bip this thing.
Okay.
So we're now going to blow it up. And here's where I screwed up. We had gotten attacked in this valley like 6 days earlier. I didn't kick my security out far enough out to like the hilltops. And so it was more of I thought it was going to take us like, 5 minutes, and we're just going to bip this thing real quick, be done with it. So I don't need to kick dudes way far out. We can do a little, not local security, you can have local security, but like a little closer in. It'll take us, 5 minutes, and we'll continue mission, no issue. Well, it was buried so deep that it took us way longer, and it's like, oh boy, we're sitting duck here. Like, get out, set up a mortar firing position. Like,
because you know that the Taliban's now maneuvering on you. You're a static position.
I know what's happening. And so tactically, that's where I'm just like, what were you doing? Well, they led us up from the ridgeline, and like I can remember looking out and seeing like them like tearing up my mortar firing position. Somehow nobody gets shot. Like, you know, we start firing back. We manage to get assets on station relatively quickly. Like we don't get killed. No, none of us get killed, but it's like, you know, inches away from guys getting screwed up. We had the one NCO get shot in the hand. Well, like we didn't get, nobody got hurt. Like the NCO that got shot in the hand, like continued, like drove back, continued on the drive back. And to answer your questions, I've gone on this like 8 minute soliloquy. Like, what is a good firefight? Like that, the sense of adrenaline is, if you've ever played like football or been involved in a combat sport or something like that, the like camaraderie you have with the dudes next to you, the spike in adrenaline, and then at the end of it, like we didn't have, like all of my guys came out of it, and I remember like, you know, we come drive out of the valley now on top of some ridgeline, and like just the feeling of like, okay, that was like a little spooky, but like we didn't get hurt,
right?
Like, and you know, it's truly, it's like the feeling, you know, you're tired. It's a firefight that seemed like it took 30 seconds, probably was like an hour and a half. It probably was only like 45 seconds of actually like, you know, true action, but it's like, it felt like it was, you know, went on for a day, and like you're tired and you're thirsty and you're like, your body is somehow depleted because of the adrenaline dump. But like now you're on this ridgeline and like your dudes are good, and like
you have brought, you know, your will against the enemy, right? And you have succeeded in that moment. It's really, really hard for, I would say, a lot of people to understand the desire for that, or the, how are you, you know, excited about that? And I try to convey, well, it's like we're not the practice squad, right? We got to do the thing that we had been training for, you know, decades of our lives or years of our life at this point. And we got to do that and do that well. You know, that we have this warrior class, or these people that want to go and do this. And that's their internal like validation of doing that, right? Of being able to go and fight on behalf of the United States. That all of this coming back to 9/11, 2001, right? Where now we're finally being able to go and fight the Taliban in this. So it's like in my own answer to this, like, why wouldn't you want to do that? It's like this back and forth. It's hard for people to understand that, you know, like we're not warmongers. No. We're not, you know, looking to go and kill every man, woman, and child out there. It's like, no, but you know, we've had our hands tied for, you know, decades, while these Taliban are being able to maneuver freely, and we get a chance to be able to exert our will against them.
That is better said than I did, but that is exactly the sentiment. And one of the things, so after I'd left Afghanistan and after I came back, I ended up going to Germany. It was my next duty station, and I got there like 2 months after Russia had invaded Crimea. And that unit we knew immediately that unit was not going to be on the patch chart, that we were going to keep basically 2nd Cavalry Regiment. They were stuck in Germany because we were worried, you know, what happens if Russia tries to take the Baltics. And I remember that, you know, for a lot of our lieutenants, we had, you know, lieutenants that was their first duty station. You know, they had missed Afghanistan and Iraq, and now it's like, oh, we're not going to get a chance to go to Afghanistan. We're stuck in Germany.
Right.
And it's like, you know, they grew up watching this second Battle of Fallujah. They grew up watching the Battle of Marja. They grew up like seeing these things, and that's what they want to do. And now it's like, oh, we're stuck. We're gonna train with the Estonians and Latvians, and I don't get to go to Afghanistan, and it, you know, it sounds silly to people, but like I'm not going to be able to get a combat patch for the Army. You know, I'm not going to be able to get a combat patch. I won't get my CIB. Like what, you know, and you train for so long and you want to do it, and then it doesn't come to fruition. So to your point, yeah, we don't want to be warmongers, but at the same time, you've devoted the better part of your life to training for this, and you've reoriented your life towards it.
Yeah.
And then it doesn't happen.
That's a weird space for people to be in. What do you say to people that haven't gotten that actual call?
Your service is just as valuable. I mean, and you know, recognize that like that's got to be tough. because there were a lot of things that I wanted to do. I unfortunately tore my knee up, and so that I didn't get to go to the special mission unit that I wanted to do. I didn't get to invited for a tryout, couldn't go try out because my knee was a mess. And I totally get that sense of unfulfilled. You just feel unfulfilled. You feel like there's been something left out there. But for the people that happened to, your service was incredibly valuable. Only so many people raised their hand to do it. You were one of them, and the timing, the whatever it was, just didn't line up. But you're enough of a warrior to have raised your hand and wanted to do it and put yourself out there and were ready to sacrifice everything on behalf of the country.
Wow. Very well said. Very well said. And I think it's actually extremely poignant, right? For the idea of that. And we have to face that a lot. And how many times have you talked to people that they feel less than or whatever? I'm like, your number just didn't get called, man. It had nothing to do with you as a person. But there's no amount of, consolation or whatever conversation that can ever take that away from them. That's something that I think has been very tough. I think that also good because we've transitioned out of a generation of war, right? So I think there's a goodness to not having a ton of people that have done that, but it's also very tough to be able to correlate that, to other people. So, all right, so now take me through. So the rest of this Afghanistan, so you were there for 8 months, right? And you're on this, it's almost like you're trying to hold water in your hands, right? Is what it feels like. In these individual valleys, trying to be able to create these logistics and influence pathways that are disappearing as soon as you leave the valley itself.
Yeah.
How do you cope with that?
I think, again, at the time, I thought that we were making more of an impact than we ended up doing. So I think there was a little bit, the copium that was happening was just naivete and thinking that it was happening more. The other way that I think I coped with it is the relationships that I built there. And I look at like the Afghans that we helped mentor. And I think for me, that was the big thing. It's like, okay, they were better than when we left them, but their tactical abilities and the XO that I had, mentor, he ended up being either second or third to last chief of staff of the army of Afghanistan. He came in like June. Dude was so cool. Spoke like 5 languages, said he didn't speak English, but would correct my interpreters if he was unhappy with the translation that he received. Very smart and had been fighting for forever and, had been fighting pre, American invasion and had seen a lot of war and, really smart. Making those relationships and for him he got a bad hand because he became the chief of staff of the army in like June or July of 2021 as like the country's already provinces are falling left and right and was there for like a month or so. But building those kind of relationships and seeing them, they were better than when we left them, but the conditions of the country, the Ministry of Defense level, the core level, none of that like the underlying problems, none of that had changed. And so I think for me, the way I dealt with it is, one, I convinced myself that it was going better than it was, and then 2, just the relationships and seeing the improvement in the people we worked with.
So I want to be careful with putting words into your mouth here, but I have conversations, and I had a conversation just yesterday with another, a fellow Marine, and we were, kind of lamenting over how these wars turned out. We felt like that they were tactical victories, on every sense that every time that we engaged the enemy, we had a tactical victory. And I don't want to, broad brush stroke it, but more often than not. But what we felt is there were operational and strategic failures through there. Would my sentiment, would you match my sentiment, or would you have a correction in that?
No, I think unfortunately you're right. And I say unfortunately because I still believed why we were there. And, when I think about what, especially Afghanistan now, like what that country looks like, and the condition that women and minorities and men live in, I'm still glad we did it. Like I obviously wish it would have gone better. I'm not one of those people that is, now been like, what was even the point? Because the amount of people that I met that I wanted to do right by, that I feel a sense of guilt that we haven't. I still wish we would have done it. So it pains me to say that, yes, I agree with you that I think they were strategic and operational failures, because I actually still do believe in the underlying reason. And admittedly, like, Afghanistan's complex. And we went there to, get bin Laden. And you certainly look at how much the, mission changed from the initial jawbreaker teams in October to where we were in 2013 and 2014, and what the point of us being there was. But, as I look at, like, the Afghans that I met when I was there, as I think about the Afghans that I know here in the US, they are great people and they don't deserve to live under the Taliban. And, I have no regrets about us, trying to help make that a better place.
Very well said. Very well said.
So, okay, so you're working in Afghanistan, you're in, a ton of firefights, you're kind of watching, like I said, holding this, you're trying to hold water in your hands as you're kind of going through this. Is there a point in time, knowing where you're at now, right? So you're doing a lot of advocacy, you're doing a lot of, you're the executive director of No One Left Behind. Was there a point that made you a little bit more aware of the Afghan plight, or was there a connection that you made inside of that really drove this point home to make this your new life's mission?
I'm so glad you asked it, because it allows me to talk about one of my favorite people. So my interpreter was Amodi. And I'll just share his last name because he still has family in Afghanistan and is worried for their safety. But by this point I was a company commander. So we had a pretty big interpreter pool, because we had all of these, majors and captains that were going over and interacting with the Afghans. So we need to have an interpreter for all of them. So we had a pretty big pool. But as a commander, I got to have kind of my pick of the litter. And so I got Amadi. And, he was mine because he was recommended to me, because, he had great English skills and also spoke both Pashto and Dari. And so he was recommended to me, and like, good dude, but like, weren't necessarily like close at first or anything like that. And I remember, I think I'd been commander for like maybe 3 weeks or so, and we got into our first firefight of the deployment. And we're doing some vehicle mounted operation, and we're taking contact. And I remember I had my American RTO with me in my vehicle, and I had Amadi. And I can remember, like, I'm having to kind of talk my RTO through things, because it's just first time, and it was making sure, like, hey man, like, have you called up and told battalion kind of what's going on? Like, have you delivered this message? Like, what have they said back? And just kind of making sure that, he's following what's going on. And at the same time, like, I'm, then checking in with Amadi, and I'm like, hey man, have you told A&A that, like, second platoons maneuver in this direction? He's like, yep, already tracking, just so you know, A&A are, here's their forward line of trace, like, here's what they're doing. Like, hey man, let them know that we're setting up a mortar firing point. Yep, already did. They're tracking, they're good. And it's one of those. So like at the end of it, I'm like, hey man, like, how'd you know how to do that? Not just like Dari to English, but like, how did you understand what was going on? And that's when he told me, like, oh, I've been doing this for 4 years. Like, I have served from Helmand to Ghazni. Like, it has been in it. And for him, like, for us, we have year-long deployments or 6-month deployments, or, if you're special operations forces, sometimes even shorter ones. And for him, it's like, no, this was 24/7, 365. When he would go on leave, he was having to dodge Taliban, checkpoints going back to his home, making sure, his family was lying about what he did for work. Very real risk of being killed if he was captured. So for him, that war was much more serious. And, for me, it was like, okay, I'd done my 2 Iraq deployments.
Right.
I think I'm God's gift to the infantry here. And he made me feel very small and humble in my service, when I'm like, okay, this guy's been doing it for years now. He's got a lot more skin in the game for America than I do at that point.
Yeah, there's like a gravity that kind of comes with that, when you're like, yeah, I mean, I'm kind of a tourist here, right?
Yeah.
And I get to go home at the end of this. I'm looking at this event horizon when I get to go wheels up on the Freedom Bird right back home. And he has to stay. And because he believes in this thing so much, the risk to life, the risk to his family, the risk to character on every single, like, to a cellular level, there's a respect that we have for them, I think, in that space. Is that, did you guys stay in contact? Did you guys, how did that relationship continue to blossom?
Yeah. So one, that's beautifully said what you said there, because for them, like, they've burnt the boats. Like, there is no, you've agreed to serve with the Americans. Okay. Like,
There's no going back.
you better win, because there is going to be a price. And, the job they're doing, it's not just translating for me and the ANA on the radio. I can remember there's a great, I love this photo because it's the most heroic looking photo of me. Like, I'm slim, I'm tan, I just look badass.
Like pointing this direction.
Yeah. And in the background, you can see Amodi back turned, and it's him working with the ANA because those ANA only spoke Dari, and he's there translating Dari to Pashto, helping them tactically question villagers right after we got attacked. So for them, they've burnt the boats.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I just, the service that they provide, you look at how few Americans have served, and then I look at like the service that they've provided, and it's like they've done more for my country than I have, and I always felt a kinship to them because of that. And so, to the question of like, did we keep in touch? Yes. So one of the things that we did is there's a program called the Special Immigrant Visa Program, and it's a program that exists for both Afghans and Iraqis. And it provides them a visa to come to the U.S. And the Special Immigrant Visa, I'll just call it an SIV for simplicity going forward. They have to have served for a minimum of 1 year by or on behalf of the U.S. government, so directly employed by the Department of Defense or through one of the contractors that is an eligible contractor that provided the mission support through interpreters. Have to serve for a year. They have to get a letter of recommendation. They have to pass HR verification. That gets them to something called Chief of Mission approval that says, yes, you're eligible for this SIV. And then they have to do background checks. They have to do interagency vetting, in-person interview, medical clearance, all that stuff. But at the end of it, then they can come to the United States on the Special Immigrant Visa. It functions basically as soon as they arrive. It functions as their green card. They get a green card once they arrive. And it's America's way of saying, like, you've stood with us, your service has been invaluable. There's a very real risk on your life. And so this is your path to safety. And so for me, it was really important that we took care of Amodi and the other interpreters. So we wrote letters of recommendation for every interpreter that had worked for us and had done a good job. But for Amodi and then one of our other interpreters, Jack, who was my battalion commander's interpreter, I'm like, I want to make sure that I really want to make sure that they're taken care of. And so I ghost wrote for my brigade commander, I basically ghost wrote this thing with his signature block on it, and took it to him and said, like, hey, Colonel Austin, will you sign this? Like, Colonel Austin's name carries a lot more water than Captain Sullivan's, and so we got them that letter of recommendation, and I'm so thankful. He ended up arriving to the U.S. in 2016. He's in the Pacific Northwest, has got a great wife.
Does the SIV extend to their families as well? Because that's always a real thing, right?
Yep.
There's such a very tight-knit community that it would be, I think that for me, it would be limiting that if they were like, well, you get the ticket and nobody else does, because then there's a potential for retribution on the families. How far does that extend?
So it does, but it's just immediate family. And there are some intricacies that make it really tough. And we can talk about my no one left behind work and some of the things that I've unfortunately seen, but it's spouses and then unmarried children under the age of 21.
Okay.
But think about this. Let's say that you are, you're a father, you had kids young, but you worked for the U.S., spent 10 years working on behalf of the U.S. Your daughter is 22. And for a lot of these guys, they'll have met their SIV eligibility. Let me back up a little bit. You had to work for 1 year. Well, they cared a lot. So a lot of them worked for a decade. Yeah. And, there were people that could have left in 2017, were there until the very bitter end because they believed in their country and they wanted their country to, not just survive, but thrive and be the place that we all hoped for it.
But at the same time, they're running out the clock on the eligibility issue for some of their family members.
Exactly. And so now you didn't leave and you have a daughter who is 22 and unmarried. What do? Let's say you've got 3 younger kids. You've got a 22-year-old daughter. She's no longer eligible to travel. Do you bring your younger kids? You have 3 younger daughters below her. Do you bring them to the U.S. and then leave her behind? Because that's unfortunately the reality, because she's no longer eligible. And so we've seen a lot of cases like that where we get it. We don't want to have a special immigrant visa program where your second cousin's uncle can come on your visa because, you know, he met you one time in a family reunion. But at the same time, like, I don't think it captures kind of all of the threats that exist and kind of all the cultural components.
So as a man in the military, I always understand that there's policy and then there's exception to policy. How easy is it in the SIV process to have an exception to policy?
None, zero, zip. So a couple different things. One, you know, there's that 22-year-old not eligible. There's not an exception to policy there. The other one is, I said you had to serve for 365 days. Let's say you are an interpreter. You're doing great stuff. On day 350, you're with me. We strike an IED. You become a bilat amputee and cannot continue serving. You didn't serve 365 days. You're not eligible for the SIV. So there is not, and don't get me wrong, like, we should have a mandatory minimum amount of service. We don't want someone that showed up, you know, was there for 2 weeks, said, "Hey, I'm good. Where's my visa?"
Sure.
But it's rigid. There is not an exception to policy for that. And so what happens is, you know, for that daughter that's, you know, aged out, or for the person that didn't meet that service requirement through no fault of their own, they now have to try and find a different immigration pathway. And the Taliban does, you know, Taliban's not like, "Oh, no, don't behead him. He only served 350 days."
So they've met the requirements for persecution,
Yes,
but not for, you know, liberation, effectively.
correct. And so what happens is they have to try and avail themselves of another immigration pathway. And so it'll be refugee. There's a program called humanitarian parole, and that's what they have to try and do to find their way to the U.S. And so, you know, in the aftermath of August of 2021, you saw, you know, SIVs came to the U.S. You also had, what we ended up doing is we issued a lot of humanitarian parole, and that was because the SIV process was taking too long. So humanitarian parole, very expeditious, something we could do much sooner. It would give Afghans entry to the U.S., but then once they got here, they'd have to find another pathway. So it would mean they would either have to finish their SIV or apply for asylum. Problem is, like, you know, you remember how hectic it was in August 2021. You know, did they grab all of their required documents to show, hey, here's my badge, here is all of the documents of pay stubs that I had for the last 4 years. I mean, we actually told Afghans to burn that because we were worried if you were having to come, if you'd worked for us in Kandahar and Kandahar just fell and you're now having to make a ground movement on August 17th, are you really going to bring all of your documents saying, yeah, I worked for the U.S. government for the last 7 years and drive through, you know, 7 provinces with all of that stuff going through checkpoints? No.
The answer is no. Yeah.
Yeah. So, you know, we brought a lot of people here under humanitarian parole, and now, you know, they're having to navigate an asylum claim. The, you know, U.S. asylum system is, you know, backlogged and imperfect, I'll say. And so it just made it for a very tough situation. And for Afghans that didn't get out, you know, they're now, if they're not eligible for the SIV program, they were having to try and find a refugee claim. And so, you know, you'll hear terms like P1 or P2 or P3. Those are different refugee programs that a lot of people had to try and avail themselves of because the SIV did not cover them.
So I have to ask, you know, we don't cover politics on this show, but we do cover policy. If you can help shed some light, is the SIV program closed currently?
I think it would be, yes. I don't think it'd be fair to say it's not. There is a lot that goes into it, but yes. So some executive orders, a series of executive orders have come out. So there was an executive order issued January 20th of 2025 that basically closed the refugee program. So the refugee was closed then. In early December of 2025, there were more executive orders that came out. I'm thinking about the timeline here. It was early December of 2025, and it took effect January 1, 2026. Additional orders came out that basically have stopped issuance of the SIV. And it's really stopped issuance of visas for any Afghan nationals, but it does affect the SIV especially. What we're seeing is that some chief of mission determinations are being made. So that initial step where Afghans and Iraqis, it's saying, yes, you're eligible for the SIV. We're seeing that some of those determinations are being made. It's normally happening on cases that are actually like appeals. So we're not seeing the numbers that we used to it. Some of those are happening. And then the really kind of, I think the saddest thing that's happening is people are still being scheduled for interviews. So if they have their COM, if we've already adjudicated them as having SIV eligibility, they're still being scheduled by embassies, largely Embassy Islamabad, but other embassies as well. They're being asked to come in for their interview. They interview, and then they receive an automatic denial under Section 212F of the Immigration and Naturalization Act. So basically, this executive order says we can't issue you a visa, and yet the embassies are still telling these people that have active cases come in. They interview for their visa. Doesn't matter. They could say no concerning information, can say all of the right things, can have the most compelling case in the world, but because there is a executive order prohibiting the issuance of visas, they receive an automatic denial. Now, if that executive order changes in the future, what happens to that underlying case? We believe that the COM approval, that underlying chief of mission approval, the underlying SIB eligibility is still good, but then they're going to have to reapply for an adjustment of status and basically come back in for another interview. So for all intents and purposes, no, the program's closed. I also want to make sure that I don't put this just on the administration. Congress also dropped the ball. So for new SIV claims, the cutoff was December 31st of 2025. So we've been working with Congress. The program doesn't exist indefinitely, and we pushed Congress to continue the program, give another year so that people can continue to apply for the program. Unfortunately, Congress did not extend it, and so now no new SIVs are authorized. And I will say it gets a little complex because we talk about the SIV program. There are actually 3 SIV programs. There's an Afghan program, there's an Iraqi program, there's something called the 1059 SIV program. The 1059 issues only 50 visas a year. So that one, new COM determinations can be made, but that's really the only one. And so Congress has unfortunately really dropped the ball as well. And I will say this follows. When people ask me whose fault is it, the answer is all of them. There have been issues with the SIV program going back to the Bush administration, the Obama administration, the first Trump administration, Biden administration, this Trump administration, and all of the Congresses that have existed in between. When I think about us falling short on our promises to Afghan allies, it's not been any single party, and it's not been just the executive branch. It's been a whole of government effort to, unfortunately, fall short on our promises to Afghan and Iraqi allies.
Do you have an estimate of how many SIV eligible interpreters and their families are effectively stranded?
So, I thought the thing that would be the most boring for your listeners was me talking about my time trying to move connexes, but it's actually going to be this math problem that I'm about to do here. The people are really important, but the math problem I'm about to do is not particularly exciting. We should have a repository of all of the Afghans and Iraqis that work for us, right? We should know,
sure,
because we did counterintelligence screening on them. We badged them. We have pay stubs. All of those things should come together where we have cataloged, and we can say, okay, we had 60,000 people that work for us, and 25,000 have gotten in, and 35,000 still have not, and that has not happened. And so what we have to do is we actually have to reverse engineer based on the SIV applicants proving it themselves. So because we don't have this repository, we have to wait for the SIVs to apply, and then we look at historic approval rates, and that's how we kind of backfill and deduce how many are out there. And so right now we know, so the State Department, they do quarterly reports, and within there we can parse some data, but again, there's not a catalog, so it's imperfect. But we know that right now there are over 30,000 cases where we have COM approval. So we have said, yes, this SIV is approved. They are eligible for the visa. They still have to pass security vetting, because and at No One Left Behind, we absolutely think it's important. We are filled with national security professionals. We believe it's important. Yeah, absolutely. Let's do rigorous interagency vetting and background checks. But we know at least 30,000 have eligibility for the SIV before their visa interview. There are still another 100,000 cases where a COM determination has not been made. So we are looking potentially at, potentially 50,000 or so that could be out there that would be eligible for the program.
Are these 50,000 actively trying to
yes
exercise the program?
I would say yes, but also just given the pause in visa issuances, a lot of people have kind of resigned themselves and have, are trying to create a new life in Afghanistan. And I will say, like, it's interesting when we think about risk for No One Left Behind. So No One Left Behind, we provide direct financial assistance in Pakistan to COM approved, so those SIV eligible Afghans that are waiting for their visa interview. Last year, we also provided no cost flights for them. One of the things that happened as part of the executive order is that flights that had previously been covered by the U.S. government were not. We stepped in and ended up flying 3,300 Afghans and Iraqis from Pakistan, Iraq, over 20 other countries, brought them here to the U.S. at no cost to them and their families. But when we think about like our sustainment in these other countries, we realize that like it's not all the risk to Afghans isn't the same for everyone. So if you were an Afghan that was a mechanic, you're probably at a lower risk than if you were a special operator that was in the 0 units working for the CIA. But the risk isn't zero. Like one of the first Afghans I met last year as we started this flight program, he was a mechanic. He was turning wrenches. He was also a paraplegic because he'd been shot twice in the chest by the Taliban. So, we recognize that even for those that, maybe aren't at the absolute upper echelon of risk because of their previous service, even if you were fixing Chigo air conditioners on base, that you could be at risk of being killed for that. And so, for us, as we try and like figure out, who we can support, and as Afghans look at like how are they still actively pursuing it, for them it's a lot of like how do they evaluate the risk to them because of their service on behalf of the U.S. What kind of opportunity do they have in Afghanistan? So some of them have just kind of resigned themselves to, I won't be able to come to the U.S. even though I'm eligible for the SIV because I just don't trust that the program will back up. Others are still holding on to hope because they know like, okay, I was a human source for the U.S. and they will absolutely kill me if I go back. And so for them, they're still trying to, find a way to stay in Pakistan, not be deported by the Pakistanis to Afghanistan, to find another third country to kind of wait it out in because there is death waiting for them.
So we've talked tactical victory, operational and strategic losses. I have to ask, as another military, member, how is this posture? And I would argue, probably not have an argument here that our, federal government over the last couple of decades has dropped the ball on SIVs and being able to honor the sacrifice of our allies in harm's way. How is that going to affect potential future allies in future engagements?
That's what concerns me the most. I mean, don't get me wrong. Like I have an affinity to the Afghans that worked with us. I think we have a moral obligation. I think America's worse when we don't live up to our promises, just from like a moral standpoint. But what concerns me the most is the real national security impacts on us. I look at the local nationals that helped me as interpreters, but many other things during the global war on terrorism. They were critical. I worry that, what happened, Second Lieutenant Sullivan, is he going to have that support in the future? Like, is the next generation of infantry officers, of lance corporals, of humaniters, you kind of name the function, are they going to be able to rely on local national partners to stand with them? And I worry that we will not. And clearly, like war, America is not done with war. I mean, we're actively fighting Iran right now. Depending on when comes out, maybe we'll have a peace agreement, maybe we will not. But I think it's very clear to me that like America's military engagements abroad are not over. And I very much worry whether it is in the Levant, whether it is in Eastern Europe or the Western Pacific or Africa or kind of you name it. Will we be able to count on local national partners to sign up and serve with us? Or will they look at America's failure to keep promises and say, what, actually, I think the Chinese look like a better bet.
The United States service member signs a contract and they write a blank check to the United States payable with their lives. And I think that our interpreters and our allies that we have enlisted over the generations of service that we have done the exact same. I would personally believe that the same luxuries, or I would say the same benefits that we provide to our veterans of service should be awarded to, and at least the very minimum of allowing the other members of these agencies to be able to come to the United States, to be able to provide, to give them that American dream that they fought for as well. Speaking a different language, right, and wearing a different uniform, or even wearing our uniform. I think that, to me, that's an abdication of our responsibility of who we are as Americans and what we try to project into the world. I think that to us, that's a violation of our own set of values. And it breaks my heart to hear about that. But it is as uplifting as it is frustrating to hear about your organization, to know about your organization. I wish that your organization didn't have to exist.
Yes. Yeah. No, me too. Our view is that like this should be a U.S. government function, and I wish we wouldn't have to remind legislators and politicians that to be the kind of moral conscience for the promises that we've made in the past. And I would hope that we wouldn't have to do these things, but we unfortunately do. I will say, one of the things that Secretary Rubio has is his kind of three pillars: is, does it make America safer, stronger, and more prosperous? And I think about the manner in which, look at Assad, right? The previous guest on the show. Look at Mike Assad, and I think about like his journey from Iraq to being a 0311 to now. I'm convinced that dude will be the CEO of a Fortune 500 business like sooner rather than later. And, I think about like what we've done with him. He's made America safer, stronger, more prosperous. Our taking care of that guy has made America safer, stronger, more prosperous as he came to the U.S., joined the Marine Corps, has master's degrees and is doing great things. And he's incredible, but he's not unique. And I look at it, that we have a lot of other incredibly deserving Afghans and Iraqis that would have very similar stories if we just gave them the chance.
You use the term, and I paid very close attention to the terms that you've used through this. I was in some of my own writing, I made sure to be able to help out as best as possible. And so in the book that I wrote, I wanted to be able to bring in the idea of Iraqi and Afghan interpreters and their partner nations and how they fought with us, and wanted to be able to kind of shed light on that. Someone corrected me recently, and maybe you can help with this, is early on in the book, I wrote the term translator, and then later on in the book, I wrote the term interpreter. Can you help explain the difference? Because I was corrected, and in my next reprint, I will correct that. But could you shed some light on that? Because I was unaware of that.
Translator is a direct translation from English to Arabic, English to Dari. It misses all of the parts of communication that aren't direct word-for-word translations. It misses the slang. Interpretation is interpreting the culture. It's interpreting the nuance. It is the nonverbal cues. It is how this specific word choice may not actually translate directly in the way that it was presented. And so for me, our interpreters, they were helping say, hey, we've established mortar firing position at Alpha Bravo, whatever. And that's a direct translation. But as we're talking to villagers and asking about what their concerns are, asking about their ability to read and understand what was being said through body language, through word choice, through all of those small things, helped orient me to the culture. The other thing is, you talk about us being a tourist. Our interpreters were continuity between units. Like, you would do a relief in place, transition of authority. You'd have a left seat, right seat. You try and spend 2 weeks to try and orient incoming units. That's not enough. When you have an interpreter that is there, that is, fought up and down the same valley for, 2 years now, and actually knows who this, who the key leaders are in this specific collot. Like that is what an interpreter is. So it's far more than just a translator.
Yeah, I love that. And it was one of the things that I just didn't know myself.
Yeah.
And it was the idea that a translator can be handled by a widget, right? But interpretation, right? To be able to ideate, to be able to understand, to be able to create meaning in a new place. That is what an interpreter was. And I was like, wow, I was unaware.
Yep.
And so I want to be able to help, correct that shit, help change the zeitgeist, right? A little bit of what that entails. So how can I help? how can we help? And this is what I want to do, a call to action, right? Because this absolutely breaks my heart, right? When I heard about this with, Assad, when we were kind of interviewing, it was one of the most American stories I'd ever heard, right? I come from a family of immigrants, and my immigrant pathway was much different than Assad's, but God, I can't find a person in my own history that is more deserving to be becoming an American citizen and being able to provide to the United States, because they have already done so much and are willing to do so much more. How can we help?
Yeah. I hate that the first thing I'm going to do is ask people to check out No One Left Behind and consider a donation. NoOneLeft.org is the website. Last year we spent $4.5 million just on flights to move Afghans and Iraqis to safety in the U.S. As a nonprofit, a lot of nonprofits receive dollars through the U.S. government. We receive $0 from the U.S. government. Everything that we do is...
This is mind-boggling, dude. Like this is a problem that the United States created and is unwilling to do literally the smallest amount necessary to be able to help solve the problem that we as the United States government created. This is mind-numbing.
We just moved he was a senior Afghan National Army special operator, like very senior. We just moved into a third country. I can't even say which one because I'm worried about it. It's going to end up, costing us, it's already cost us tens of thousands of dollars. We were approached by people within the intelligence community and JSOC about this guy and his son, who was another NSOC guy, and couldn't get help in official capacities, but it's important to the people, that work in these organizations. And so on the one hand, we're helping the U.S. government as they approach us in non-official capacity, but we're not getting as much official capacity support as we want. It can be a bit galling for me as well, because I do think it is a U.S. government responsibility, and more should be done. But until it happens, we're going to keep doing it. And so, as I said, we spent nearly $4.5 million just on flights alone last year. This month we will spend probably about $70,000 sustaining Afghans in Pakistan and other third countries. We have a scholarship program. We also believe that the mission doesn't end when they get here. That's actually how No One Left Behind was founded. Was we want to make sure that as SIVs arrive, that they were welcomed. You've left a life behind. You've established a brand new roots here. You don't have access to capital or credit. It's not like you've got a FICO score.
Right.
And so we provide no interest loans for SIVs to get cars because we know that depending on where you live in the U.S., that can be really important. For a lot of them, they work gig economy jobs when they first arrive, and so having a car to do Uber or Lyft or DoorDash is really important.
The last thing we want them to do is leave a country vulnerable to come to a new country and then enter into a vulnerable class of
Correct.
people who are unable to gain a foothold.
Yeah.
That would not be solving the problem. That would just be that would be moving something from one place and then creating another problem here.
Totally.
Absolutely. It's such a smart idea to be able to continue that, give them trajectory.
100%. And when you think about, again, these are people that burnt the boats for their country. They're not people that want to sit here and just, have government largesse keep them alive. They want to work. They want to earn for their family. And so how do we make sure we're setting them up properly for it? That's one of the ways. So with all these things, again, we don't receive either government or state funds to do it. And so for any of your listeners that are in position to support us, we certainly would appreciate it. If you're not, that said, advocacy. We always need more advocacy. And so it's talking to your friends about the issue. It's also writing your member of Congress. I know that can sound trite, but you would be surprised at how much those offices, those constituent directors in whether it be a Senate or House office, that they look at what are people reaching out to them on, what are people actually, and if you suddenly are hit with 50 or 75 issues, or 50 or 75 kind of constituent outreach on a specific issue, that's a powerful heuristic for those members of Congress and Senate. And so if you care about this issue, if you want America to fulfill its obligations, I absolutely would encourage you to write to your member of Congress, write to your senator. Also check out NoOneLeft.org to follow our advocacy page. We make it easy to find who your senators or your member of Congress are if you don't know them. We also provide updates on kind of where are we in the legislative process, right? So there are certain bills that must pass every year. we have specific calls to action at a given time, based on where the legislation is, based on where the need is. And so would encourage people to, please check out our advocacy page, because it's got the most up-to-date resources on like what is the call to action and where can you find your senator and member of Congress.
So with that, I'm going to offer something here. What we're going to do is we're going to put a page, a link on Combat Story on our website as well. And we have some of the tools. I want to make this as easy as possible for our listeners and for our viewers. Is we're going to write a letter myself, and I will have that on Combat Story. And what we're going to work to do is create a drop down so that you can auto-generate this piece of legislative mail and that you can send to your own Congress member or United States Senator, because this cannot stand. And if you are a representative of the United States government at any single level and you allow this to stand, you are abdicating your responsibility to the American public and to the people who have put their lives on the line. And I challenge you to be different, to be better, and to make a difference in people's lives, because these men and women bled next to us. And the violation of the social contract that we're doing here is unacceptable. And I'm heartbroken to hear that. And I'll do everything in my power, which is just our little corner of the internet, to be able to help make other people's lives better. And I challenge you, if you have any doubts about this organization, please check out their website, check out our interview that we did with Mike Assad, where we go through what this young man did to become a United States citizen and what he's done since becoming a United States citizen. If there's any doubt in any person's mind over the power and the validation of what this entity does and what this organization provides to people, our most vulnerable people who have stood up and stood shoulder to shoulder with us, if there's any doubt, check out No One Left Behind. Check out Combat Story, and we'll make sure to be able to continue the advocacy as best as we can.
Could not thank you enough, AJ.
I cannot thank you for the work that you guys are doing, for the work that you have done as a United States Army officer, infantry officer, leading soldiers into combat, making good comrades along the way, learning from some of the lessons and some of the mistakes that we've made along the way, sharing your story, being vulnerable and sitting here with us, sharing a cup of coffee and some lemon water, right, as we sit and talk about, Earth and the cosmos and what life happens afterwards. This stuff matters. And I really can't thank you enough for being able to come here today and share your story with us.
My pleasure, AJ. Truly, thank you for elevating, Mike's voice. Thanks for sharing my story. And thanks that all that you do for veterans.
Well, thank you, sir. And so what we do is at the end of every show, we allow you the floor. I want the last word to come from you. So anything that you'd like to say to our listeners, I'll shake your hand and say thank you for being a new friend of mine. And the floor is yours, my friend.
Service comes in many forms. You have incredible special operators like AJ. You've got just regular infantry guys like myself. You've got people that went on 7 deployments. You've got people that went on none. You don't have to be in the military to have served. I'm a firm believer that just being a good member of your community, serving in other ways, whether it be AmeriCorps, Peace Corps, Teach for America, working at your VA, volunteering for veterans, all of those things are service and they're worthwhile. Serving America is not unique to Americans, though. We have an incredibly special population of Afghans, Iraqis, and Syrians as well. We had the global war on terrorism. The operative word was global. We had Syrian allies that did the same exact work as Iraqi interpreters. We had allies in the Sahel, Horn of Africa, that were instrumental to counterterrorism operations there. So service to America is not unique just to Americans. In these small but very incredibly important groups of people, they help to keep Americans safe. They help to keep Americans alive. They sacrificed on behalf of America. They bled, sweat, died alongside of us. And I believe we need to keep the promise to them. So I hope that you will elevate your voice and make sure that we do not leave anyone else behind.